because I know that some of you are very keen on experiential work and maximizing that. So we need to ground the whole idea of what the breath can do in a little bit more shared experience. So I'll do at the beginning an exercise for everybody, which you can then take into your home groups, where we say, hello, processing yesterday, bringing your learning impulses for today, processing the individual exercise, and generally getting into the groove of making the most out of today. Do the demonstration as promised. Then we will need to do some more detailed theory with working with the breathing as it is versus regulating. I've got handouts for this, and there is material. It's to think about that relationally is not straightforward. So I will try and keep it as absorbable as possible, taking into account the complexity of it. Then we want to, after the demonstration and the theory, we want to practice in home groups. So we want to do at least one session in the group of 6. So you together apply what we've done so far. Then we do a bit of feedback and discussion and processing of that in the whole group. And if there's spare time, depending on how quickly all of that goes, in an ideal world, I would do another demonstration. After you have been working, I'll do another demonstration. You need to think about whether you would like to volunteer. I had a message from Joe in the evening to say that he's keen to be a volunteer, but there may be other volunteers. But obviously for a demonstration in the middle, there 2 is already very optimistic. I'm not sure we're going to get that in. Of course, you could also be the client in your home group if you want to work yourself. All right. Any comments just to the structure of the day? No, it's perfect, isn't it? So that's why I spent all these sleepless hours. No, I'm just joking. So let me stop the share. Anything anybody needs to say before I take you through some kind of individual exercise regarding the breath? I'll show you one slide and then we do the exercise. The wonderful thing about the breathing, as we said yesterday, is that it is probably the most significant intensity regulator of the body-mind, regulating the intensity of experience, for better or for worse, for more vital or more calm or more centered or more depressed. The breathing is the crucial, the most essential tool for intensity regulation that the body-mind has. And of course, it has that other huge feature, critical feature, which is that most of the time it happens spontaneously, even when you sleep. Your system does that for you. But of course, you can influence it deliberetely. And without being able to influence it deliberately and actually being able to change your state of mind, your consciousness, breath work wouldn't even exist if it didn't have this magical feature of being influenced deliberately. So let's just have some brief overview how you can influence your breathing. What are all the variables and parameters that you might influence deliberately? So there's definitely the speed, how fast, how slow. There's the gaps between the breath. There's emphasizing the in-breath and the out-breath. There is the length and depth and the smoothness of the breath. That applies both to in-breath and out-breath. Then there is the question of how forced or controlled, or both in terms of speed and slowness. People instinctively do things with their breath like you can hear stories about kids being really upset or traumatized or beside themselves, and they start experimenting with the breath. I've heard it many times that kids start trying to hold their breath in a way to stop life because it's too painful. And so when we come along decades later and we suggest all kinds of breathing techniques, that's not the first time that human beings have messed with their breath. Huh? Like many people have experimented with their breath, and in order to regulate the intensity or the unbearability of their experience. Then, of course, we can pay attention to where in the body does the breath happen, or is the breath being experienced. I said yesterday that when you watch babies breathe before they've been messed up, then there is a wave. It's like a wave rolling in from the ocean. And when you see most of us breathe, you will see that it's not quite as smooth. As the breath travels up the body or down the body, you will see that there's little jumps, little steps, rather than it being smooth. Wilhelm Reich talked a lot about, I'm not going to go into this, but he talked a lot about how energy flows in the body and how the alimentary canal is like a worm. And how does a worm move? How does a worm restrict things? When things move vertically, this is why we were talking yesterday about vertical, then you've got horizontal muscles that can stop the flow or block the flow or restrict the flow. So you've got especially the neck and you've got the diaphragm. These are horizontal structures that can restrict. So when the diaphragm, still people coming, when the diaphragm is tight, and for many people it is chronically tight in a way that they don't even know because they think this is normal, then the diaphragm cannot really respond to the fullness of the in-breath. It restricts the fullness of the in-breath. So if you do not ever get to expand fully, you're definitely not going to get the melting sensation on the out-breath. So we need to somehow work with the tension in the diaphragm and equally the tension in the neck, in the throat. Many people's necks and throat are chronically restricted or tense, or at least in parts, some of the muscles. So this is, of course, an important accessory to breath work, is some kind of body work. You know, and Kate was talking yesterday about when she does what she calls release work, which is basically releasing tensions and protective tensions, what Wilhelm Reich calls the armor, then feelings will come up. Then energy will flow and feelings will come up. Feelings will emerge. So you can pay attention to how that happens in the body, which is not quite the same thing as the client's subjective awareness of what happens in the body. Because some areas of that are numb to them. They're not in awareness. There may be things happening in the body that are obvious to you that are not obvious to the person. Another parameter is nose versus mouth. That makes a difference, fairly quick difference. If you keep breathing through the nose or the mouth, there's many, of course, yoga exercises, pranayama breathing and things like that, that make not just a difference to the body, to the state and the physiology of the body, but then correlating also to the state of the mind. And then generally, you can ask yourself when you're observing somebody's breathing pattern, are they in their habitual comfort zone of how they know the breathing pattern, how they know themselves usually, or are they outside of that? Are they in unfamiliar territory? Maybe in unfamiliar territory that is especially charged, uncomfortably maybe to them or to their ego, or is it especially low? and restricted. And, like I said, kids sometimes try to hold their breath in order to stop the flow of experience. So we're going to do an exercise where we're going to be experimenting with that, with the various parameters, just for yourself. Any questions about that? Maybe I've missed some parameters. I think some of you can probably add to this. This was just a quick brainstorm. I haven't paid much attention or focus to all the various actual techniques and exercises, because you can get that somewhere else. The person I recommend is a guy called Dan Brulé. He's called the Breath Master, and he has a foundation course. I think it's fairly affordable. I think, I don't know, $90. And it's like online lessons, many, many, many. And every lesson, just about every lesson, is a different breathing technique. He doesn't tell you anything about the relational aspect of it. And when we talk about relational, as we will have to get into in more detail later, there is an internal relationship in every human being. You have a relationship with your spontaneous experience. There is an inner relationship. And then you have outer relationships. So none of these, as I said yesterday, not that I've ever heard, none of these breathwork masters and teachers and instructors never say a word about the outer relationship. They may say something about the inner relationship. Yeah? When they give you instructions like, be gentle with yourself, let yourself be breathed, don't force anything. This is speaking to the inner relationship. Why do they need to do that as part of their instructions? Why do they need to speak to the inner relationship? Because the inner relationship, in simple terms, how the mind speaks to the body, is a fraught relationship for many, many people. So if you really have an internal persecutor or scrutinizer or some harsh person, then your body will react to that, and your body will, in degrees, contract and not available for the instruction, even though it has a good intention, or even though it's in principle, it's a meaningful thing. So then the other thing in response to this question is, why don't I put so much attention on different exercises and what those different parameters of breathing, what they do? Because it's very individual. All of these instructions and systems of breathing, they assume that the same parameter, like say emphasizing the in-breath, I think that's actually not a good example, because I think emphasizing the in-breath will tend to charge up and intensify and provoke and generate energy and intensity for most people. So that's not a good example. But there are some other parameters, like whether you leave gaps, or whether how slow or how steady the breath is. The out breath is tricky because the out breath means different things to different people. So at the end of the day, I have some misgivings about making too general assertions about what these different parameters do for everybody, because I'm more interested in the individual breathing pattern and how, you see, that's where it becomes really important to take into account, as I said yesterday, that when you are giving somebody or giving yourself an instruction how to breathe, you're not doing that in a neutral terrain. This is not the first time that somebody interacts with their breath or their body. There's a long history to it. And the underlying thing is that there is an underlying conflict, that the body and the mind, let's call it that, it's not quite the right way of articulating it, but let's just say, because people talk like that, the idea of the body and the idea of the mind would be a more precise way of talking about it, that these processes don't have a happy marriage in most people. So you cannot pretend, as far as I'm concerned, that you can just give an instruction to the mind, somebody's mind, that the mind will receive generously, compassionately, and apply generously and compassionately to the body. Because in most people, the body and the mind are in some degree of conflict or even at war. You know, Western civilization is based on, I mean, if you read somebody like Susie Orbach, like Fat is a Feminist Issue, you understand how many people, in this case women, in her book that she was focusing on, are at war with their body. Not just with what their body looks like, no, also what their body feels like. So whatever instruction you give regarding the breathing, you're telling the person's mind to do something in relation to their body. You are involving yourself in the pre-existing conflictual relationship that the person's mind has with their body. And therefore, it's not a straightforward, relationally, it's not a straightforward thing to give an instruction because it lands in a conflictual zone. And you don't quite know that conflictual zone. Imagine you've got, in some kind of war zone, you've got this area which is full of underground mines. You know how human beings get nasty and they plant these mines. And it's just like, you're chucking you're chucking something into the minefield. You don't know where it's going to land and whether it's going to blow up a mine. What kind of instruction are you going to give until you know the territory, until you know the terrain, until you know where the landmines are? Which is basically, what do we mean by landmines? Trauma triggers and defenses. And until you understand that, and until you even at least take that into account, that that's a possibility, that you are involving yourself in a very delicate balance there between different forces of potential trigger, trauma, explosiveness, or defenses, numbness, lack of awareness, frozenness, restriction, tension, unless you're aware that there's a big sensitivity and, in a way you could say, responsibility that goes with messing with that, because it's a delicate, balanced, conflicted system. And it's a very individual system. So I'm very reluctant to make generalizations. One way we could understand that breath work, for some people, when you listen to people go to these kind of online breathworks or breathwork workshops, some of them come back, that was the best thing ever. My life is completely changed. I'm a different person. This is wonderful. Everybody should be doing breath work. When I was first doing rebirthing in the early 1980s, I did a training, like a few months training in rebirthing. And we had to pair up and we had to give each other sessions. And I paired up with a very interesting English guy, somewhat upper class. And, the English have a particular kind of capacity to torture their children by sending them to boarding school. And he was one of those, very intelligent and interesting and eccentric. And he wrote a book, How to Save the World with Breathing. He was so enamored by this whole rebirthing process. And then I was his buddy and I had to be his rebirther. And he hardly ever felt anything. I couldn't get him to have an intense experience. And I was, at the time, I was already pretty clued up when it comes to breathing. But he never felt much at all. He felt numb, but he was convinced. He was saying every politician should be given breathing sessions because that would change their consciousness and then the world would become a peaceful place. So it's very individual how these things land and what people do with it, and there's all kinds of idealizations. And so you will find people who say it's the best thing since sliced bread. It will change everything. And then typically in these, whatever group you have, you will have some people who have some kind of process. They will feel things. There's some kind of intensity. There's some kind of insight or their consciousness changes. And they say, yeah, that was a profound experience. And then you will always get a good chunk, I would say 30 to 40% of people who say, well, what was all that about? Didn't do anything for me. I didn't feel much. Why was I making all that effort? And then they get envious of all these other people having these wonderful experiences. Why did they have that? And why didn't I have that? Why do people respond so differently to the same instruction? Because the whole breathing pattern and what intensifies and what gets defended against and how the mind and the body are related in every person is very, very idiosyncratic and individual. And one generic instruction where everybody does the same thing in the group and goes through the same instructions is hardly going to work for everybody. So that's why I don't give you much of those particular instructions or techniques, because you can figure that out for yourself. You can go out there, just visit Dan Brule, or you do some of these online workshops that I put into the references. If you want techniques, there's many, but whether they work or not, or whether how they work, that is the purpose of our weekend here, to understand the principles and the relational principles, internal relationship, external relationship, that provide the container, the context in which it can work or doesn't work or works in degrees. That's really the purpose of this weekend, not to give you more and more techniques, because they're already out there. Is that a kind of coherent answer to your question? People underestimate the very idiosyncratic defensive structures and the traumas that are being kept at bay by that. Yesterday, I gave you the metaphor of the high tide. Yes, there are generally, we'll do the individual exercise now, and we're going to experiment with that a bit. Generally speaking, for many people, if you emphasize the in-breath, if you leave out the gaps between the breath, you can which is mainly the emphasis of rebirthing and holotropic breathing. There are people who've tried that and have misgivings about it, or it didn't work for them. And so there are people now who do something called transformative breath work. People are adapting these things, and they're trying to deal with the limitations and the flaws and the restrictions of it without really going down to the root of why it works or doesn't work. So that's what I'm trying to give you, which arguably, in my mind, that is a whole lot more precious than faffing around giving you ever more techniques. You want to understand the underlying principles, the relational principles, and the fact that there is already an existing underlying structure of conflict that you are involving yourself with. All right, I'll answer this question, then we do the exercise, because I know some of you are cooking there wanting experiential. So we'll do experiential like that. That's the intention. And some of what you're saying, there is rhyme and reason to it, but I will try to include something that the psychotherapists in the group are probably familiar with if they've been in my groups before. There's something that happened for me after many years of struggling with similar questions, especially as a Reiching. You think about, how do you break through the armor? Or if you're more gentle, like Eva Reich or like Gerda Boysen, we have Gerda Boysen in England, then you think about melting the armor. You don't just think about breaking it. And so for many years, I was stuck in the dichotomy between breaking and melting. But both of them are, let's say, interventions that acquire a relational significance. And so I will later talk about the relational turn. And when you understand that more on the different level of what does your intervention, whether it's a harsh one or whether it's a gentle one, what meaning, unconscious, relational, emotional meaning does it acquire in the client system, you then drop a level rather than just getting caught between harsh and gentle, or supportive and challenging, or provocative and following or something. They are all interventions made by somebody, and that somebody is part of the exercise. You see, most therapists and most breath workers, when they make interventions, they have reduced themselves in their own mind to the idea of somebody helpful. If I regulate you, if I make a harsh intervention, I'm thinking, this is ultimately for your good. If I make a gentle intervention, I'm thinking, it's ultimately for your good. I'm doing this because I'm a nice guy. I'm a helpful person. I'm a benign, caring person, and that's what you need. I am intervening on the assumption that my intervention is being received the way I intended. That is wishful thinking. Maybe the client's mind will get a little whiff of my intention, But I'm not just making the intervention into the client's mind. I'm making the intervention into the client's body-mind system with all its history. So there is no telling what meaning my intention will acquire in their system. And as we said yesterday, like Joe gave a beautiful example, he was trying to encourage somebody to, let go and to, I don't know, breathe more and feel free to breathe and to open their mouth. And he meant it as an encouraging kind of gesture, but it was completely received differently. It had the opposite effect. So this is a beautiful example, tiny little beautiful example of something that most therapy and definitely most breath workers are completely oblivious of, because they think of themselves as neutral. They're just given instruction as if they are relationally a neutral, benign person. Well, you're not neutral. The way the client's body-mind system and the body-mind's history receives the intervention has a relational meaning in their conflicted war zone. And that's what we're paying attention to this weekend. That's the foundation. And then we can do all the techniques. But first, we need to be grounded in the fact that we're not just neutral, benign helpers. Exactly. Okay. Yes, it's an experiment. Everything you do is an experiment, and then you see how it lands. And what is hugely underestimated is the tendency, when you make an intervention, actively, passively, as you say, your presence is an intervention. And that's what I said yesterday. Deep down, the person is there and pays you the money because they have some kind of self-improvement agenda somewhere lurking in the back of their mind. And so I can sit there and say, I'm accepting you perfectly as you are. I don't need to improve you. I'm not even convinced you need improvement. You're just perfect as you are. I can perfectly love you and accept you as you are. You may sit there with that intention, but that's not the whole story. They have all kinds of internal parents, internal persecutors. You are never good enough. You're missing out on manifesting your potential. You have to be doing something more. No. So these people, these ghosts, are also in the consulting room. They're also there with us, and they translate and mistranslate every possible intervention you do. So that's why I'm saying, let's be straight about it. Let's not pretend that we're not in a self-improvement campaign. The self-improvement campaign is part and parcel of the whole field. I have a very judicious, complex, paradoxical understanding of what self-improvement really means. But I'm holding that to provide the context. So the relational container, this is something that psychoanalysts understand much more, because Winnicott, since for the last 70, 80 years, they've been thinking about what is the relational atmosphere in which interventions happen. Okay, good. All right, let's experiment a little bit with the parameters of breathing and what it does for you in your system. So get yourself relatively comfortable. It's going to take about 10 minutes, I would think. And this is just, as Elena just said, inspired by an attitude of curiosity and experiment. And everything I do or don't do, in myself, with you, with anybody, hovers within this paradox of accepting things as they are, understanding that in the conflict, there is an impulse for more, that there is an emergency that pushes beyond things as they are, beyond the status quo. So when you understand that everybody is pervaded by this kind of tension between things are good enough, nothing has to happen, things are just fine the way they are, nothing more is required, I'm fine as I am right now, nothing terrible is happening right now, that kind of being, acceptance and being, is a really important attitude. And it's always already in tension with some other attitude that pushes for more, where you're sitting on a volcano that hasn't quite exploded, where there is a kind of impulse towards, as Jung calls it, impulse towards transcendence. It's an instinct, you can't help it. So that tension between something wanting to happen and nothing needing to happen, not forcing anything, that tension is always there. So whatever we do, we can inhabit that tension. Okay. Notice your current state of energy and consciousness. Whatever that means to you, how is your vitality, your aliveness right now? How are you this afternoon, evening? How are you experiencing your energy, your vitality? And what is the weather in your mind? What's your state of consciousness? How calm? How uncalm? Is there pressure anywhere? What's the landscape in your mind? Is it like a serene landscape, like a sunset? Or is it some kind of agitated landscape full of energy, passions, pain, activation? Where are you on that spectrum? So notice your body, mind, your physical presence, the sensations in your body, just as they are. Some of us have immediately, when we pay attention to the body, we have a little evaluator running in the mind, evaluating everything as good or bad, pleasant or unpleasant, making judgments about it, rightly or wrongly. So notice if that goes on. But of course, thousands of years of wisdom have told us that there is something very precious that happens when the human mind just attends to things as they are, with some degree of curiosity and compassion. So notice how you are. Imagine that you are somebody that you are really deeply, curiously, affectionately interested in. Who is this mysterious creature that you call yourself? What do you know about them? And notice their vitality, their energy level, whatever it is. Lively, depressed, warm, cold, peaceful, agitated. Okay, that's our starting point. Take a snapshot. Imagine you have a multimedia camera that captures your energetic body-mind consciousness, body-mind psyche state, and you take a snapshot. What does that whole thing feel like right now? And then you take a moment to wonder, how does that compare to any moment that comes to mind in your life that was more intense, whether happily so or painfully so, but any moment where your experience of yourself and of life was more intense, significantly more intense. And sometimes in trauma work, people kind of, put numbers on it. Like, you can do that for trauma reactions, or you can do that for vitality generally. So what number would you put on your state now in comparison to whatever intense experience came to mind? What percentage of aliveness are you experiencing now in comparison to that intense moment that you just remembered, that came to your mind? And then let's spend a moment to use the wonderful capacity that the human mind has of transporting yourself into that memory. Using your embodied memory and imagination, wind the video back to that moment in your life that just came to mind. So how do you do that? You can do that whether it was intensely traumatic, whether it was intensely joyful, whatever it was, it's always the same principle. They also use it in trauma work when they work with what they call the safe place. You basically want to give yourself a multi-sensorial, multi-modal, including as many channels of your experience as possible, memory of that event. You want to be able to feel it, to smell it, to feel it in your bones, to think it, to see the images, to see what it was like to be there. You can have a sort of bird's eye view, helicopter view looking down, but eventually you want to go into the memory and be in the body and look through the eyes of the person experiencing that experience, that intense experience. So I'll help you take yourself back there into that experience. So some of us remember best that we go most easily back to a memory through sounds, some of us through images, some of us through sensations. So bring alive what it was like to be in that moment, what it felt like in your body, what you saw through your eyes, the scene, maybe other people involved. You hear the sounds that were going on. You bring alive the emotions you were feeling. And as part of all of that, you have some sense of what your breathing was like in the intensity of that situation. because you were intensely involved, you probably didn't have any awareness of your breathing at the time, but you sort of imaginatively reconnect with your breathing in that moment. And you breathe like that. However you remember or imagine breathing at the time, breathe like that now. And then give yourself permission to fully experience the breathing at that time, including all the various impulses that were arising in your system. That might include, you're muted, so you can make noise, for example. You can say things, you can make, you can use your voice as part of the vital energy that you were experiencing at the time. So that can start by you noticing your impulse to use your voice, to say things, to express things, to make a noise. Notice the impulse, the noise that goes with the experience that would come out of you. For many people, this is associated with shame, the expressiveness, the noisiness, the freedom. For many people is restricted by some kind of shame, some idea that you would look like an idiot or something. So see whether you can get beyond that kind of shaming restriction and give yourself permission. Maybe by telling yourself that you are a vibrant, vital human being, and that your energy, your vitality is a beautiful thing. So when you are really in the experience, as much as you can allow yourself to regenerate it, let's do some experimenting with the parameters of the breath, okay? So whatever breathing you're having now, see whether you can regulate the intensity of the experience by varying some of the parameters of the breath that I'm talking about, that I'll be suggesting. So regulating means intensifying, up-regulating, or down-regulating. So you can decide for yourself initially. I'll later make more suggestions, but for now, what would be your immediate inclination? Would you want to down-regulate and calm yourself down? Or would you want to up-regulate and intensify the experience? If you want to intensify, emphasize the in-breath. If you want to calm yourself down, let go on the out-breath and make the out-breath longer. Like, that's the kind of out-breath. We'll do other experiments in a minute, but that's the initial thing. So you need to give yourself about 10, 15 seconds to notice any kind of effect. Emphasize the in-breath or emphasize the out-breath, depending on what's your preference. Do you want to agitate yourself, intensify more, or do you want to calm yourself down? Experiment with in-breath, emphasizing in-breath versus emphasizing out-breath. Emphasizing in-breath means you increase the volume, you increase the speed, you put more oomph, more beef into making the in-breath stronger, more energetic. So you can feel when you emphasize the in-breath, you expand your chest more, the volume of the chest goes bigger, and you make the in-breath as complete as you can, as full as you can, giving yourself as much air and oxygen and energy as possible. Or on the out-breath side, you make the in-breath shorter, you let it be shorter, and you lengthen the out-breath. And you drop into the out-breath. For those of you who had a painful, difficult, anxiety-provoking memory, the next suggestion is going to be more relevant. They call it box breathing, which is very simply, you count in-breath 4, then you hold your in-breath for 4, then you let out the out-breath for 4, keep counting, and then you leave a gap of 4 at the end of the out-breath. Then you count 4 for the in-breath, hold for 4, count to 4 on the out-breath, hold for 4, go back to 4 for the in-breath, hold for 4, count to 4 on the out-breath, and hold for 4. And notice the energetic result of that kind of breathing. What happens to your energy when you breathe like that? What happens to your mind when you breathe like that? And what happens to the intensity of the experience in your memory when you breathe like that? Then let's try, in a way, the opposite thing. Do the rebirthing breath, where you emphasize the in-breath and you don't leave a gap at all. As soon as the in-breath is finished, you allow the out-breath. And then decide on, experiment for a minute with making the in-breath faster. Okay? So like this. I'm making it a bit louder than I would, just to really, for you to get the flavor. And breathe in through the mouth and breathe out through the mouth. So strong, determined in-breath, and then letting the out-breath go. Try that for 30 seconds. Deep in-breath through the mouth, and then breathe out. For some of you, after 10, 15 seconds, your mind will wander. So anticipate that. Keep breathing strongly in through your mouth. Fill your lungs to the maximum and then let go. So notice what happens to your energy. Notice what happens in your mind. Some of you can nod if you felt some tingling. Did anybody feel any tingling? Yeah, some of you felt tingling. Yeah. See, it's very, very easy. It just takes 30 seconds to intensify the awareness, the sensation of the body. Yeah. That, in simple terms, that is intensifying the energy, that tingling. I said earlier that let's experiment with the out-breath. I said earlier that the out-breath is quite different. People experience it. Some people are scared of dropping into the out-breath because the out-breath has a tendency to invite sensation. Now you can, when you breathe out and then still, there's the melting at the end. That invites more intense inner sensation. This is the sensing of your body. And some people like it and some people don't like it. Some people are freaked by it. So that then depends how that kind of emphasizing the out-breath is for you. Whether your inner sensate experience freaks you or whether you enjoy it. That can be quite different in different people. So just try that for 30 seconds. Breathe in deeply, but not forcing anything. And then really notice the dropping quality of the out-breath and feel into your body and notice what you notice. Your focus is on the out-breath and the sensations that are generated or that come to your awareness through dropping into your body on the out-breath. Okay, that's about 30 seconds. So notice what happens to your energy. How do you react to that? What happens inside? What happens in your mind when that's the emphasis of the breath? So these are just some of the parameters. So let's have another couple of minutes and you do what you like. Like vary whatever the parameters, what is the variation of all of that over the last few minutes that you enjoyed most or that you found most satisfying. And then do your own thing. Do your own technique in whatever will optimize your enjoyment. So let's have a couple of minutes, 2-3 minutes of that. You do whatever your helpful mind can determine will maximize your enjoyment of your breathing. see whether you can get into a headspace of or an attitude of thinking that this is like a spacious gift that you're giving yourself, where there's nothing else to be done for now other than giving yourself mindful attention to the kind of breathing that gives you joy and satisfaction or peace or whatever is important to you. So the underlying attitude that you might want to generate is similar to like a parental feeling that you have for the well-being of your child. When you attend to them, you feel love and you feel, right now I've got all the space and time in the world to attend to your well-being. And then you give yourself that same kind of attention. For many people, it's much easier to give that to a child than to give that to yourself. And you can, maybe some of you have reactions. You notice you're being distracted. What's he going on about? You'll get irritated. These are all possible reactions. Some of you may think, oh God, can he please stop rambling, and can we just get on with the learning? Some of you may feel now that you want to spend the rest of the day like that and not get distracted. Some of you may feel like, oh, that's enough of that, and let's get on with it. With something else, there's lots to be done. There's always lots to be done. Okay, that's a little flavor, playing around with the parameters of the breath. Huh? So, Demetrius, can you set up the groups of 6, and then we do a little bit of processing. Processing includes just what happened for you now, the last 10 minutes. Processing includes leftovers from yesterday. Processing includes, or sharing includes, your impulse, your wishes, preferences for the rest of the day. How do you want to get involved in the rest of the day? Is there anything that is pressing from within you? Those are the main things, I think, plus anything else that you think is important. Before we go into group of 6, anybody want to say anything? There's a little bit of space before we go into small groups. So, Dimitris, apparently not. Everybody is going to take their experience into the small group. This person that I mentioned, Dan Brulé, he has a whole lesson, a whole lecture on yawning and how good yawning is. And that it's a really important mechanism, and that we should all forget about politeness and yawn in each other's faces all the time, because it's a wonderful mechanism for relieving tension. Unfortunately, it also means that there's tension in the first place. So there is a limit to, you can relieve the tension with yawning to some extent, and that's a good thing. But at some point, you also maybe want to get down to the root of the tension, because you don't have to keep yawning for the rest of your life to relieve yourself. You might really want to resolve the tension rather than just relieve it. You have a wealth of experience to draw from how that might work compassionately. There is already a pre-existing, let's say, loving relationship between your mind and your body that has been practiced for a long time. So then you are more likely to derive the benefit from that kind of attitude. You can approximate that more easily. Unfortunately, many people in the world, when they come to us for breath work or therapy, they haven't had the benefit of that. They haven't had it in their early life, and they haven't had it in their adult life. And so they cannot get themselves as readily into a kind of compassionately attentive attitude, and B, they cannot get themselves into an unobstructed experience of the breath. So the little hurdle, the little obstacle that you had there, where the breathing and the intensifying of the breathing actually brought awareness to the tension in the jaw. That's a whole process. That's partly why, was one aspect, one purpose of breath work. It does tend to do that. If you intensify the breathing, regulate the breathing, but even if you work with the breathing as it is, it'll still intensify, because you are intensifying your awareness. So this is what we'll come around to later. Whether apparently you go down the kind of dichotomous avenue of let's regulate the breathing, let's push it up, or let's push it down, whatever we're doing, let's intervene and let's regulate it. Let's be deliberate about it. Whether you go down that avenue, or whether you just stay with the breathing as it is, and you take an interest and you pay attention, and then you pay attention to the relationship that gets set up by the breathing as it is, including all the ghosts. Whichever one you do, it'll tend to intensify. So you see, you do not need to push the breathing or down-regulate, up-regulate. You don't need to do that, because the more you pay attention to the relationship that gets set up, there will be an intensifying awareness there also. So that is how we can make breath work in most situations, because we're not just doing the regulating and the technique and that works for some of the people some of the time. But when we can also work with the breathing as it is, and the attention has an intensifying effect, relationally intensifying effect, all kinds of precious processes, insights, deepenings, awareness of tensions and holdings and the habitual conflict, the awareness of that gets intensified also, even without changing anything. So that's an important principle of how we're working this weekend. That you trust that attention, whether you change the breathing or you don't change it, you leave it as it is, you will get to significance. When we're talking about intensification of awareness, you will get to significance. That's, as the facilitator, as the breath worker, as the therapist, you want to have that confidence that regardless of what happens in the client system, you will get to significance. If they breathe their head off and go all intense and pushy, or if they don't do anything, you trust, you know that if you pay attention to all of these things that I'm proposing, to the fullness of the relational container, you will get to significance. So you don't need to use a crowbar to get anywhere because you trust that significance will emerge. Okay, then we go into the group of six. It's always wonderful when you do something that doesn't make sense because it means you're listening to some deeper intuition. Okay, so hold your hand on your belly. You felt moved to do that. And then the interesting thing that we then would maybe, I would suggest we go more deeply into is that you feel the attitude of your hands and you feel the experience of your belly and how that you feel the area where they make contact and that we pay attention to how that is for each of them. Yeah, as if there were two people. There is a hand holding one person, and then there is a belly receiving the touch. And then I would invite you to pay attention to both of them and to the relationship they are having. But that's why we would need to go into the experience, because in the same way we just did the exercise, it's like you give yourself the gift of time, attention, and spaciousness, and you feel both of them. You feel the hand giving something. It feels like the hand is giving touch, and it feels like the belly is receiving touch. So you have a giver and a receiver. They are different people. The more you pay attention to their relationship, the more you feel both of them, the more the meaning will be obvious. That's what I was saying earlier. That is a very individual meaning to you. I'm not sure the belly has the same meaning for every human being. I'm not sure that holding your belly, the hand gesture, has the same meaning for everybody. You know, it's perfectly possible for somebody to hold their hand on their belly and to, you know, many people hate their belly. They think it's too fat, too sticking out, too this or too that. And so they cannot hold their belly without some kind of judgment or disgust or some kind of negative reaction, because their belly is the location of some kind of shame and trauma. I remind you this processing the exercise and what you found in the way that people have just done, like Sophia and Yogia. So there's that to do, plus any leftovers from yesterday, plus your impulses for tomorrow, for the rest of the day, I mean. Let's have about 15 to 20 minutes. I come and visit. And you can see that this weekend, in a way, is still part of the same sense that there is incredible potential in it. And then it's upsetting when the potential gets not quite manifested, when it gets wasted. And so if we really want to make use of the powerful potential of it, then it is obvious to me that the major blind spot is the relational context and container and the relational awareness of the, you know, internal, external. So if we add that to it, then that powerful intuition about how transformative it can become for many people, not just for some of the people, some of the time. You know, I'm still beavering away at that. So I'm still signed up for that. But there's no point just doing the blind technique because it's just so haphazard in its effect. So the real power of it really needs the relational awareness. Okay, so I visited some of the groups, especially the English ones, and things are nicely cooking, I think. Not sure about the Greek groups. People have said that, you know, I always have to remind me that some people appreciate breaks. But you see, I'm an intensity freak, and I could just keep going the whole 6 hours because I'm just I'm surfing the intensity. But I know not everybody is like that. But officially, we announced that we have breaks after each couple of hours. So we're just about due for a break, which I'm happy to honor. But let's just prepare the next bit then. let's have a little bit of time before we have a break. Let's have a bit of time just feeding back from the groups. And then let's get ready for the next bit. And the next bit would be for me to do a demonstration. Was there anybody else who thought they might seize the opportunity, the rare opportunity to volunteer to be the breathing person and to be in the middle, scrutinized by everybody? I'll say something briefly about that. Same point, really, over and over again. If you keep in mind the person I was talking about that I was buddy to, and that he never felt anything much. Why do people extend the breathwork session to an hour and a half, 2 hours? Some people do 3 hours. Why is that necessary? That is necessary because there is so much resistance. And there is relational resistance, internally and externally. So if your sledgehammer doesn't work, you have to have the sledgehammering for longer. So can you restrict it with some kind of guarantee to a time? I do breath work as part of an ordinary therapy session. That means I cannot let the person ramble on at the beginning for 20 minutes, because then I've only got 40 minutes. I don't think 50 minutes is a bit short, but an hour normally is fine. But there is the risk that things go really down to the underground, to the basement. And then there may be situations where you can't quite wrap it up in an hour. That happens, I don't know. For me, that happens like maybe 1 in 100 sessions. If we know that it's likely to do that, then we can maybe pre-arrange an hour and a half. But for most people, it is perfectly possible to intensify things and contain it within an hour. But that requires everything I'm talking about this weekend. Because you must not be relationally oblivious, because I can guarantee you where the charge that doesn't appear to be happening in the breath work, in the breathing instruction, I can guarantee you where it goes. The charge will be in the relationship. But both people are completely oblivious of it. It's like you're having a pressure cooker, but you're taking the lid off. In order to have the pressure cooker work, you have to have the body-mind process of the breathing, and you have to have the relational awareness. The relational awareness is the container. If you take the lid off, you can do 3 hours, 4 hours, 5 hours. You can cook it and cook it. It's not going to build up pressure. The timing that is required is really dependent on whether you integrate all the breathwork techniques and the body-mind awareness and the powerful potential of that, whether you integrate it with relational awareness. And then it's like Amna and I, how much did we spend yesterday? Was it 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes? It was still a profound thing. It doesn't take an hour. Yes, of course, we would want to get into it. And we said, we're not going to get into it now, but you could feel, and this is, of course, why I gave the title. I added, I didn't just say integral-relational breathwork, because, what do people know? What do I mean by integral? What do I mean by relational? There are so many definitions of that hardly means anything. It's so abstract. But to talk about breathing at the intimate edge is conveys a slightly different meaning. And I think most of you could probably feel that within just a few minutes, there was a kind of intimacy. The intimate edge was present between Amna and me, wouldn't you say? There was a kind of playfulness. There was, the scrutinizer was there immediately, and it was intimate. I don't mean, like intimate in that kind of narrow definition, though, out there in the world, like in the widest sense, intimate with self and intimate with another, like a deep, wholesome connection and a kind of mutual understanding. As I said yesterday, that is generally lacking in breath work. In the best case, the sitter, most people intuitively understand that when they are the sitter, that they are meant to, and also they feel inclined to, generate a benign, encouraging presence. Keep going, that's fine. It's like a kind of parent says, you can do it, it's fine, I'm here, you can do it. Yeah. People think of this as the sitter. But of course, if you think about it psychoanalytically, it is a parental function. It is interactive regulation, but it's only a tiny slither of that, the interactive relational function that the other person might have, which is what is the topic of this weekend. The sitter only occupies a very limited and very predictable little slither of that, which is still helpful. Some people say, without the sitter, I wouldn't have this experience. I need that person to remind me. I drift off. The person says, keep breathing. You're doing fine. Breathe deeply. They keep reminding me. They do it in a benign way. I need that interactive encouragement and regulation. So even in the very limited relational form of the sitter, there is something for many people, very helpful and necessary about that. But we do not want to restrict it to that, because it's like a parent who's only ever unconditionally encouraging. Some people mistrust that. They say, oh, this person is just sitting there. I know they're doing their job, or I'm paying them for that. That doesn't really affect them internally. It doesn't create any intimacy, because the person internally reduces it to just a function, to just a role that doesn't really touch me. So to just benignly sit there, for many people, doesn't do anything. It's just water off a duck's back. That's where the relational complexity, if you really engage with that, if you include the ghosts, if you include the complexity of what, like we said yesterday, what is the breathing pattern responding to? Is it just the person there, or is it also the ghost, or is it my internal relationship? It's complex. There's a crowd there. There's a relational complexity of many people in the space, in the felt space, in the imaginative space. And that's what you want to use. You want to use the richness of that, because that generates intensity. And then you don't have to breathe your head off for 3 hours, because you can generate the intensity through the missing relational attention, which is, like I say, is like taking the lid off the pressure cooker and trying to generate pressure. Does that make sense? Am I making any sense? Yes. So that's what in psychotherapy we call the working alliance. And that is what we mean by the intimate edge. And the intimate edge is very delicate and complicated and complex, because any desperate ego wants, as I said yesterday, wants a powerful intervention, but doesn't trust any human to make a powerful intervention. Because when I was at the mercy of powerful people, they really screwed me up. So why would I go into the madness of putting myself at the mercy of your powerful intervention when I really can't trust people? Because give them half a chance and they screw you up. So how do you make a bond in that kind of situation? That's the pre-existing condition that you want to be sensitive to. You don't want to assume, oh yes, because I'm a breath worker and I've been doing it for 30 years, that's why you can have a bond with me, because I know what I'm doing. And that's why you're going to regress to the depths of your being and have transpersonal experience of utter vulnerability, and the regressive experience of utter vulnerability, because I have a title of breath worker. I mean, nobody functions like that. Nobody gets a bond like that just because you have a title. So no, that bond is forged either quickly, at the beginning, or with some of you. Some of you have that bond with me when Joe is volunteering. Full disclosure, Joe and I have known each other for years, and he trusts me. And that bond is already there. So this is not like from fresh. That hasn't grown, in the last few hours. But some of you who are volunteering, in the way that I've created a bond. And partly you create the bond by not being too nice. But partly you create the bond because you can be harsh, because you can say, don't bullshit me. I don't buy this. Otherwise, people don't trust you. If you're not capable of saying that, then people don't trust you. But that's what you need for the intimate edge. You need a bond that is trustworthy, so you can really occupy the love and the hate, the mistrust, and the suspicion, and all of that. You need to be available, and this is what in psychoanalysis, the principle, if we really say it in a condensed form, this is what psychoanalysts understand, that in order to have a deep, intimate bond, you need to allow yourself to be constructed as an object, which basically means like you need to be available to be mixed up with the ghost, like the scrutinizer. So yesterday, with Amna, I was available to be the scrutinizer. So I said, I can be a gentle person, a kind person, or I can be a harsh scrutinizer. I could be either. Whatever the process requires, be my guest. So that's the kind of attitude in a kind of casual terms. It's a deep and profound thing, but in casual terms, kind of that's what we want to be available to. That's what creates the bond. The person checks you out. Anybody in their right mind, they will not go into a powerful experience unless they've been like a hawk checking you out. What kind of human are you there on the other end? I know you're just doing your best there, and I'm paying you to go through the motions, all the rest of it, but no. Inside of that, you are a human, and I need to check you out. Have you been there? Do you know what suffering is? Do you defend against pain? I need to check you out. I'm like a hawk. Otherwise, it'd be stupid to go into it. Look, I'll put you big on screen so I can actually see you rather than just a stamp. Tell me, why on earth would you volunteer in front of 40 other people?
Και εγώ το σκέφτομαι αυτό. Έλατε. Με παρότριναν στην ομάδα των 6 να φέρω το θέμα σε αυτό, και παρόλο που έχω αρκετή αμηχανία και ταυτόχρονα μια τάση να εξαφανιστώ τώρα, να φύγω, είπα ότι θα το τολμήσω. Είπα να χρησιμοποιήσω αυτό το κομμάτι, και αν είναι να το κάνω εγώ σήμερα, θα το κάνω εγώ. Αν όχι, θα το κάνει κάποιος από τους άλλους. Μια χαρά. Είμαι και έτσι κι αλλιώς. Αλλά θα ήθελα να το βιώσω αυτό με σένα. Γιατί
Experience what?
Συγγνώμη.
Experience what, Nikki?
Ναι, να βιώσω αγωνία που έχω.
Yes, of course.
Το άφημα.
That's fine. Yes.
Κάποιον που ίσως μπορέσει να με κρατήσει.
Yes. Yes. So notice how you are holding in the tears. There's some part of you that wants to curl up and hold it in. As if you're there's a part of you that wants to hide. But
Ολόκληρη, όχι μόνο ένα κομμάτι.
No. Part of you is ready to come out of hiding.
Ναι, έχεις δίκιο.
No, there's both. There is a kind of courageous part that says, to hell with it, I'm going to be open and transparent. And people can see me in who I am, and that's fine. And then there's a part that wants to hide also. Both.
Okay. Το σημαίνει ότι ξεκίνησες μαζί μου τώρα.
No, we're just preparing the ground.
Εντάξει, ευτυχώς.
I'm not going to drag you all the way to the antechambers of hell right now.
Τρόμαξα λίγο.
Yes, I know. So feel, what was the scary thing, really? It's not quite there right now, but it was there a minute ago. So tell me, what was the scary thing as far as we know about it?
Το να μην γίνει αποδεκτό αυτό που νιώθω. Και γι' αυτό το λόγο να μην στηριχτώ.
Yeah, I understand. So there is a long standing sense that somehow there's a feeling that you are unacceptable by other people. something inside you is unacceptable to other people. Yeah?
Ο πόνος μου, όχι εγώ ίδια.
Okay, your pain. Okay. Okay. Why would your pain be unacceptable to other people?
Γιατί δεν τον αντέχουν. Ούτε εγώ τον αντέχω. Δεν ξέρω πώς το έχω αντέξει.
Yes. How have you endured? Yeah. Yeah.
Wow, είναι δύσκολο. Έχω ταυτόχρονα έναν παρατηρητή.
Yes, of course. Yeah, good. What does your observer say right now? Look down on it. There's you, there's me, there's everybody watching. What's the observer saying?
Keep going. Και μου αρέσει που μου το
Keep
λέει και
going, keep
αγγλικά.
going. Yes. You're doing fine. You're doing some, yes, you're doing something extraordinary. Yes, you have an English observer who knows what's good for you. Yeah. At least there's a way, huh? Even if it's hellish, but at least there's a way. There's your, yeah, I understand. Okay. Yeah. So your pain is unacceptable. And I was asking why. People can't stand it. Why? Why can't they stand it, you think?
Γιατί δεν αντέχουν τον δικό τους.
Absolutely. That is exactly what I was thinking. So it's not your fault. There's nothing wrong with your pain other than that it touches pain in others that they cannot stand. So that means your pain is not wrong. It's just a trigger.
Η σκέψη που μου ήρθε είναι ότι έχω μάθει να δίνω προτεραιότητα στο πώς νιώθουν οι άλλοι.
Exactly. Yes, I agree. Other people's stupid reactions against their pain become more important than your pain. So then your pain cannot flow. The pain needs to flow. Otherwise, it's like a stagnant pool. It becomes a kind of infested pus thing because it's stagnant. It needs to flow.
Πώς τον αφήνω να κάνει flow όταν νιώθω ότι οι άλλοι δεν το αντέχουν και χρειάζεται να το βγάλω και να το δει κάποιος άλλος. Πριν στην ομάδα των 6 με βοήθησε τόσο πολύ το ότι με κοίταξαν, δηλαδή είμαι τόσο ευγνώμων για την εμπειρία προηγουμένως. Με καθησύχασε τόσο πολύ και μου δώσει τρομερή ασφάλεια αυτό.
That's good. Yeah, great. Okay. How can you let it flow? So let's have, I'm not quite sure how long this is going to take, but we're not going to go all the way down to hell, but we're going to have a little experience of how to let it flow, or how it doesn't. Okay. So how big am I on your screen right now?
Στο gallery είσαι εσύ και πολύ μικρές 5-6 εικόνες πάνω.
Okay, fine. Okay, that's good. So you can see my face. Good, yeah?
Ναι, ναι.
Okay. You can see my eyes, yeah?
Ναι.
Okay. Okay. So keep looking at my eyes. And then notice when you want to look away. There's occasionally you're looking, and then there is an impulse to look away, to look down. Yeah?
Καθόλου και μου φαίνεται περίεργο. Έχω πάρα πολύ ανάγκη αυτό.
Yes, I know. I think that's true. How did you, that was your observer commenting, yeah? Your observer says, look, Nikki, you do really need this. You need something like this. Yeah. So your observer is a clever woman, huh? Your observer is a very intuitive woman.
Τώρα πήρα το βλέμμα μου λίγο που μίλησες για τον παρατηρητή μου, ναι. Με ενδιαφέρει αυτός, με ενδιαφέρει το ότι κάποιος μπορεί να με κοιτάει.
Yes. Yes. That's good. So it's flowing a bit now. Do you feel? It's flowing a little bit. In stops and starts, but it's flowing. The pain.
Κρατάω. Τώρα δεν μπορώ πια να κοιτάξω.
Yes, you've been holding it for a very long time. And it's not good for you to hold it by yourself. If you hold it by yourself for too long, it becomes stagnant. It's like a stagnant pool, you know, when there's no fresh water flowing through it. So it's a big challenge to let it flow because the habit is to hold it in.
Η εικόνα που μου περιγράφεις ταιριάζει τόσο πολύ με τη σωματοποίηση που έχω κάνει. Δεν φαίνεται στην κάμερα, αλλά... Δεν θέλω να πω περισσότερα για αυτά. Δεν θέλω να πω περισσότερα γι' αυτό, αλλά ταιριάζει πάρα πολύ στον τρόπο που το έχω σωματοποιήσει όλο αυτό. Έχω ένα εσωτερικό τρέμουλο, το οποίο πιάνει λίγο περίεργο, γιατί έχω ένα εσωτερικό τρέμουλο που πιάνει μόνο τα χέρια, αλλά αυτό το κομμάτι. Κανένα άλλο μέρος του σώματος και είναι λίγο περίεργο που τρέμουν αυτά.
Yeah, good. All right. So keep looking and shake. Let the shaking happen. So now we can include the breathing. So you look, you feel the shaking, and now you breathe into the shaking. That is how we use the breathing to let things flow. You feel the shaking. That's one of the first steps. So what do we mean by breathing into the shaking? It means like when you breathe in, you feel the shaking, the intensity, the sensation of the shaking. When you breathe out, you let go into the shaking. You let your body do its own thing. And you keep looking at me. Whilst
Είναι δύσκολο να το κάνω όλα ταυτόχρονα.
What's that? Say again, Mama.
Είναι δύσκολο να τα κάνω όλα ταυτόχρονα.
Yes, because of all the habits of keeping it in. Yesterday I was talking the theory. Now you and I are doing the practice. It's difficult to be with your pain, to be with your breathing, and to be with another person, all at the same time. Yeah. But that is what happens when the pain flows. All of these things go together. Then the pain will flow. And it's difficult because you're overcoming many years of habit. This would be a very courageous transcending of many years of habit. You have been in silent, lonely misery inside for a long time, and you're used to it. So this is like a revolution. To let it flow so I can see and everybody can see.
Προσπαθώ να φύγω από αυτό και μου πέρασε από το μυαλό ότι θα δω μετά
Yes.
από την ηχογράφηση και αναρωτιέμαι τι θα βλέπω όταν με βλέπω. Και πόσο ίσως ντραπώ όταν το δω.
Yes.
Και μέσα μου πηδάει μια ανάγκη.
Very good.
Πηδάει μια ανάγκη να το αγκαλιάσω αυτό που θα δω μετά. Και ελπίζω ότι θα μπορώ να το κάνω.
Very, very wise. Very wise, Nikki. Who is this person who's going to watch later?
Έδωσες καλή πάσα, ελπίζω ο σοφός μου αυτός που το λες. Ο ενήλικας, λέω εγώ, ο γονέας μέσα μου. Γιατί στηρίζομαι πάρα πολύ σε αυτό το τελευταίο καιρό.
But you are worried that it's not going to be the wise self watching. You are worried that it is going to be a ghost watching.
Ναι.
Yes, I understand. So let's for a moment, let's entertain the ghost. I'll tell you a little secret about ghosts. You ready for a little secret about ghosts?
Amen.
They become much less nasty when you invite them to the table.
Ο δικός μου για κάποιο λόγο είναι εδώ αυτή τη στιγμή, έχει πολύ πλάκα και είναι αυτός ο Τζόκερ που είχαν παλιά οι βασιλείς για να τους κάνουν
Yes. Yes.
Και χαρούμενους. Okay.
Yes. That's because the little fucker is a sadist.
Okay.
He enjoys, he gets a kick out of other people's pain. Yes.
Τι κάνει, sorry, ξαναπες μου λίγο.
He gets a kick out of seeing other people's pain. Unfortunately, this is a trait in human beings that does exist.
Έχει πολύ ενδιαφέρον γιατί έχει θυμώσει πάρα πολύ μαζί σου τώρα.
Yes. Let him be angry. Come on, let's invite him to the table. Let him be angry with me. Come on. Come on. I invite him to the table. Be angry with me. What is he saying to me?
Σκάσε. Συγγνώμη. Don't apologize. What are you apologizing for? I said I invite him to the table. Ναι, όχι, εγώ ζητάω συγγνώμη εκ μέρους του. Το κατάλαβα, αλλά ναι. Αυτός όχι σκασίλα του. Είναι...
He doesn't care. So why are you apologizing? You got nothing to do with him.
Αγενή. Τον θεωρώ πολύ αγενή.
Well, he is. He's a sadist.
Έχει κινητοποιηθεί.
Why do you apologize for him? He's got nothing to do with you. He's just taken residence up in you. But it's nothing to do with you. He's not you. Why do you apologize for him? No, look.
Τον θεωρώ αγενή, αλλά έχει ενδιαφέρον γιατί τώρα έχει κάτσει λίγο εδώ ανάμεσα. Αχ, τι ενδιαφέρον που έχει αυτό. Και προσπαθεί να πάρει τη δύναμη του πίσω. Έχει πολύ ενδιαφέρον. Είναι σαν να μας παρατηρεί μας τους δύο και είναι το τι έγινε τώρα. Χάνει τη δύναμή του. Τι περίεργο.
That's what I told you, Nikki. That is the secret.
Πολύ αυτό, ναι.
They get less nasty when you invite them to the table. That's what I just told you.
Όντως.
So, yeah. So, now, remember that you gave him a little space, yeah? And you said, shut up. Like what you consider rude, yeah?
Sorry. Που μου βγήκε. Ναι.
Yeah, well, why are you apologizing for laughing? Because you know that you were awkwardly laughing to minimize the rudeness. Let the fucker be rude. It's fine. Let him be rude.
Θα το γράψω στην ταμπελίτσα. Let the fucker be rude.
That's a good idea. I like it. But only with the right people. It's not a recipe for going out in the world, going to get arrested.
Δεν ήταν τέτοια η φαντασίωσή μου πάντως, αλλά μ' άρεσε πολύ αυτό.
Okay. All right. Okay. How do you feel right now?
Παρατηρώ το σώμα μου. Έχει κρατήσει μια περίεργη απόσταση. Τα χέρια μου κουπάνε πάνω στο τραπέζι σαν να με σπρώχνω πίσω. Προσπαθώ να καταλάβω...
Yes. I can have a guess what your body is doing. I think your body is retreating from the ghost. I think your body is retreating in anticipation of him attacking you, the way he was trying to attack me.
Επειδή δεν είμαι σίγουρη ότι καταλαβαίνω, γιατί δεν έχω τη μετάφραση, ακούω μόνο αγγλικά και δεν είμαι σίγουρη ότι κατάλαβα τώρα. Θα βάλω λίγο να μου ακούσω λίγο τη μετάφραση πάλι, sorry. Πρέπει να το ακούσω ελληνικά, δεν είμαι σίγουρη ότι κατάλαβα. Japanese. Μπορεί να το επαναλάβει ο διερμηνέας μας.
Yeah, I would. So you were saying you have a strange feeling in your body. You notice that your body is pushing away, like your hands are pushing against it, pushing away. And I was saying, I have a guess the wisdom of why your body is doing that. And my explanation for it is that your body is anticipating that the fucker will attack you the way he was wanting to attack me. Like when this session ends and I'm not paying attention anymore, like when you will watch the video, he will attack you. He will judge you. He will shame you.
Okay.
So I think your body is already anticipating that he will do that to you. Because he is powerful and he is nasty and he relishes other people's pain. So, okay, yeah, I'm listening.
Ναι, όχι.
Okay. So, when this will happen,
λίγο σε αυτή την ιδέα. Το τρόμαξα στην ιδέα ότι θα μου επιτεθεί μετά. Βέβαια, αμέσως η απάντηση ήταν δεν είναι η πρώτη φορά που θα χρειαστεί να πολεμήσω. Αλλά θα προτιμούσα να γίνει ένα μαγικό. Τώρα είναι η ώρα του μαγικού ραβδιού, όντως. Νιώθω πολύ την ανάγκη για το μαγικό ραβδάκι. Ξέρω ότι δεν υπάρχει. Οκ. Εντάξει.
You're a wise woman, Nikki. Well, you do need a magic wand for when he attacks you. He will. I believe he will. When the two of you are by yourselves, when I'm no longer around, I think he will. He will find clever ways of doing it. When he shouts at me, shut up, it's obvious. It's out. He's attacking me. Yes. When he comes later and you watch the video and he attacks you, it'll be not so obvious. It'll be more subtle. It'll be more insidious. Yes. So then you do need a magic wand. What's the magic wand?
Η γνώση. Ότι θα έρθει.
Yes. And that's the bottom bit of the magic wand. What's the top bit of the magic wand? There's knowledge. Yes, I agree. But you need something else. Letting the pain flow.
Και αυτό πρέπει να το γράψω.
So when he attacks you, let the pain flow. Tell him that when he attacks you like that, it really intensifies and exacerbates your pain. I find it very painful. Hearing you, listening to you, the things you say to me, I find them very painful.
Εννοείς να μιλήσω, να του το πω, να το πω σε αυτόν.
Yes.
Το ότι με πονάει.
Yes. I wouldn't say you're hurting me. I would say I'm in pain. There's a subtle difference.
Έγινε κάτι το οποίο δεν το περίμενα αυτή τη στιγμή, λίγο περίεργο. Έχει βάλει τα κλάματα αυτός.
Wow.
Ναι, είναι πολύ περίεργο. Έχει καταρρεύσει, έχει τυπλώσει. Νιώθω ότι ήταν να τον πάρω εγώ αγκαλιά τώρα.
That is astonishing. How do you feel towards him when he's crying?
Υπάρχει μια περίεργη ευχαρίστηση μέσα μου. Τώρα ξέρεις πώς
Now
νιώθω.
you've become the ghost.
Ναι.
Okay, I understand that.
Με έναν τρόπο, ναι, ότι να, επιτέλους νιώθεις αυτό που νιώθω.
But do you see that I'm also crying?
Εσύ. Δεν κατάλαβα. Ποιος κλαίει τώρα? Πολύ κλάμα. Δεν κατάλαβα ποιος...
I think everybody else saw me cry because they're not in it. I found that very moving. I did not expect that either. I didn't expect you to cry.
Ναι, μου έχει κάνει τρομερή εντύπωση. Είναι... Wow, είναι πάρα πολύ περίεργο.
Yes. But this is what you said, Nikki. You said people cannot stand your pain because of their own pain. The same thing is true for him. You already know that. Like you say, that's the knowledge of the magic wand. You already know that. But it's still surprising when it happens.
Είναι πάρα πολύ περίεργο αυτό που διαδραματίζεται μέσα στο μυαλό μου αυτή τη στιγμή, γιατί άπλωσα το χέρι μου να τον αγγίξω, γιατί...
Okay.
Και μου ζητάει συγγνώμη.
Wow.
Συγγνώμη, θέλω να συνδεθώ λίγο μαζί του.
Yeah, take all the time. Take all the time. This is very, very precious and profound. Don't rush.
Η κρυφτική εξαφανίστηκε, δεν ξέρω τι έχει γίνει τώρα.
I didn't hear that, Mana. Say again. Okay. Okay. How were you touching him?
Πώς τον ακουμπούσα.
When he reached out, how did you touch him?
Όχι, εγώ τον ακούμπησα κάπου εδώ και άπλωσε τα χέρια του και
Let's show me.
έπιασε
Let's show me. Just, yeah, really show me. How did you touch him?
Εγώ τον έπιασα όπως ήταν καθισμένος και τον ακούμπησα σε αυτό το σημείο.
Yeah, really do it. Do it. Do it. Like that. Okay. Like that. Okay. So just touch yourself like that. Show me. Keep showing me. And now breathe into the touch. Like feel your hand. This is, remember earlier we were talking about the hand and the belly?
Ναι.
So do the same thing now. So feel the hand touching his arm and your arm. And then breathe into that. Breathe into the feeling, the sensation of the hand and how it's touching the arm. And feel how you do that, how that comes out of you. That kind of impulse to touch like that. You know how to do that. And then breathe into knowing how to do that. Gently, slowly, deeply breathe into touching like that. And then imagine there's a big, big camera and it takes a picture of not just the outside of you, but the inside of you. Like it's a camera that can catch the feelings, the sensation, the whole experience, like a multimedia camera. And it takes a picture of you right now when you're touching like that. And I want you to take that picture of everything. Your feeling, your emotion. You know how to touch kindly like that. And so then there's two pictures you can put on your fridge. One is let the pain flow and the other is this one. Yeah, they hang next to each other. You put them on the fridge. And you look at it every morning, every lunchtime, every time you go to the fridge, you see those two pictures.
Είναι λίγο περίεργη εικόνα που μου ήρθε στο μυαλό.
Yes.
Δεν ξέρω γιατί μου ήρθε αυτό από το μυαλό. Είναι μια εικόνα φανταστική. Θα πω πολύ σύντομα τι υπάρχει πίσω από αυτή την εικόνα.
Yes.
Έκανα κάποια μαθήματα πριν κάποια χρόνια για να μάθω να γράφω διηγήματα. Και σε μια άσκηση που μας είχε βάλει για ένα διήγημα, δεν ήξερα πώς να γράψω ένα όνειρο ήταν μέρος της διαδικασίας να γράψουμε ένα όνειρο και είδα στον ύπνο μου ότι βρέθηκα σε ένα φανταστικό μέρος όπου κρεμόταν μια τεράστια τηλεόραση, η οποία ξαφνικά από μαύρη πήρε πάρα πολλά χρώματα και άρχισε να λιώνει. Και εγώ πέρασα από εκεί, βρέθηκα σε ένα δωμάτιο, πολύ φανταστικό τέλος πάντων, και έχω την αίσθηση ότι ήδη η εικόνα που... νιώθω μια τεράστια ανακούφιση αυτή τη στιγμή. Ευχαριστώ πάρα πολύ.
Lovely. Well done.
Η μεταμόρφωση μου έρχεται στο μυαλό.
Yes, that was the idea. Good.
Εμφανίστηκε ο Τζόκερ πάλι και είναι εξαντλημένος.
Oh, I thought he'd vanished. Yeah, good. He's not going to disappear that quickly. No, but thank you. Thank you to your impulse for volunteering. There was that observer and the courageous one inside you, and they brushed away all the possible shame and everything, and you went for it. And good on you. All right.
Also.
Thank you. Thank you, Nikki. Let's have a break. 15 minutes. Now it's whatever it is. It's 6 o'clock in Greece. Yeah. Yeah. Let's come back at 10 past. It's 5:02. Let's come back at 10 past. Thank you. All right. A little bit of processing. Anything that struck you, any reactions, anything that triggered you, any identifications with me, with Nikki, anything you learned. Let's have a bit of space to process that session. I'm not sure how it's relevant in response, but one thing I think we might take away from that kind of session is how everything is embedded in underlying ambivalence and conflict. And then I'm using my faculties to notice how every little fragment emphasizes one side of the conflict or the other side of the conflict. And what was very clear in this session was how there was a kind of, let's say, courage, and then there was the shame. And there was the courage to expose, and then there was the shame and the judgment and the joker. And so the conflict was very clear from the beginning. So then everything that happens, you can see in that context. And then one of the important things, especially amongst breathworkers, body-oriented people, most of you are vibrant. You have a kind of impulse, a kind of tendency, a kind of inclination towards vitalizing. You want the vital force, the vital impulse, you have a tendency to champion that, which makes it difficult when the system reacts against you. What traditionally we call the defense, when the defensive structures kick in. But one of the things about that session, I think, that we could take from that is how important it is to get behind the defense and to, in a way, say, for the therapist, to say yes to the defense. This has a purpose. Let's stay with that. Like you might think, for example, just as one example that I remember, I don't remember the whole thing, but I do remember one moment when she talked about the observer. And very often you might think the observer is a defensive maneuver into a kind of helicopter position. It's a kind of dissociation into helicopter position. Oh, I'm observing what's going on there between these people. And that could be. And of course, there is an observer, a shaming observer that she imagined, in the future when she watches the video, and then she thinks, how on earth could you expose yourself like that? So there are different kinds of possibilities, attitudes that the observer could take. But switching into observer position is a switching away, it's a jumping away from the intensity. So your first thought is, well, that's a defensive maneuver, that's a defensive jump, because it lessens the intensity. If you're looking down, you're not in it. But then you saw how by getting behind the observer, like saying, okay, what's the observer seeing? What's the observer noticing? To collaborate with that jump, to get on board with it, to say yes to it, to agree to it. Let's go with the observer. How there was a whole precious perspective that opened out, that if you can really go with it, it takes you straight back into it. Yeah? Because the observer is commenting on something, and then her observer is a very skilled observer. It's an observer that has practiced storytelling, creative writing, has practiced the imagination. So that is a profound, helpful skill. It's not just a dissociation, it's also helpful. The imagination comes back in to intensify. It's not just a jumping away. So many body-oriented people, once they have the intensity of the pain and the pain is flowing and we have the contact, we've got the horizontal charge, we've got the vertical charge, they would think that this jumping to the observer is just a defensive maneuver that de-intensifies, that minimizes the charge. Yes, it may be, but if you can get behind it, the movement will come back. I think that was one of the things we can take away from a session like that, that if you can be really fluid, you understand it all in the overall context of there is an underlying conflict, yes. But if you go with any side of the conflict, you still end up intensifying the conflict because it needs to cook towards the transformation. There needs to be intensification, but there doesn't have to be intensification with the sledgehammer. There will be intensification, and if you stick with it in the way that you're commenting on, Corinna, then there will be intensification. You don't have to force it. You don't have to crowbar it. You don't have to push it. Intensification will happen, but if you do it in an organic way, the intensification is much more likely to lead to transformation than a forced intensification. Why not cry? I mean, why not show the being moved? You know, if the tears are there, then in that moment, to me, that's part of the intimate edge, that I can be moved gently, or I can be moved more strongly, more intensely, and to tears. And in that moment, I don't see any reason to hold it back, to hide it. Because we were just saying, let the pain flow. So what logic is it if I tell her the secret of letting the pain flow and then I hold my own? That doesn't make any sense. When do humans use the word manipulation, or sometimes they say attention seeking? And sometimes they call children, they say that to children, you're being manipulative, you're attention seeking. Well, though, yes, I am attention seeking. I want your attention. You know, no shit, Sherlock. Yes, I'm seeking attention. I badly need it. That's not an insult. That's obvious. So, but when adults say it or parents say it, you know, why do they say it? Most of the time, they say it. They use those words from a place of disidentification. You know, it's the thing that Nikki and I talked about. You know, why is the person's pain or the child's pain difficult? Well, because it triggers the adult's or the other person's own pain. You know, there's nothing else difficult about it. You don't have to call it manipulative just because it triggers your own pain. I'm not saying that kids don't learn how to fish for things, and you know, I'm not saying manipulation doesn't exist, but parents generally tend to overuse the term. You know, instead of owning that they are being triggered, that their own pain is triggered. So there are kids that are manipulative. If they haven't had anything, then they use whatever weapons and tools they have. So if they can wangle anything out of you, then yes. But there's always a deeper pain. So is it really manipulation? Yes, on the surface, we can call it manipulation, but deep down, it's just pain driving the whole thing. So then the question is, can we get down to the roots of it, where the pain is real rather than the pain is a kind of substitute manipulation? In that moment, I didn't have a helicopter overview as to who's crying for whom. I mean, I was moved by Nikki's imagination or let's say the of the Joker transforming, because to me, it was completely unexpected. And that moved me. And then I can fish inside myself for what am I identifying with? And, am I identifying with Nikki? Am I identifying with the Joker? Am I identifying with something in myself? I think all of those. Yeah, all of those are involved. But I don't need to particularly know at that moment. I don't require myself to have an overview as to who's crying for whom, because I can feel the flowing of it, and then can think about it later. But, it doesn't have to make sense at the time because it feels productive. Any more learning questions arising from this? This was like a little bit of processing. I mean, I'm sure everybody has reactions to it and you identify it in various ways. So we could spend obviously a lot more time really going through what happened for each of you. But let's take it more to the learning level, because we want to move on and there's other things to do. But yeah, as related to the topic of breathing, did you have any questions arising from that? Was it obvious to you what I was doing in terms of the breathing, how I was using the breathing differently at different times? Did that make sense to you, or do you have questions about that?
Can you remind us the key points at which you did a breathing intervention? I'm kind of lost in the whole session.
Well, I'm too, Joe. I don't have a video in my head of what happens step by step. It's too intense. I remember the breathing when I was saying at the end, breathe into the sensation of the hand touching your arm. Yeah? So we understand relationally that this was a multi-level thing. The most significant part of it was that she was kindly, compassionately touching the Joker's arm. Yeah? That was the most charged thing. But of course, it's representative. I mean, it's like Jesus saying, love your enemy, yeah, in a nutshell. But of course, the Joker is not a flesh and blood figure. It's a composite. It's a morphed version of parental introjects and, persecutors that have accumulated in her mind over time through constant enactments. So it's not a flesh and blood figure, but we want to ground the compassionate impulse in the body. Then in that moment, how are we using the breath? We're using the breath to be with the experience, with the sensation of what that feels like. There's the emotion is already present. The transformative moving aspect of the compassion on an emotional level is already established, but now we want to ground it. So that whole thing there with taking the picture at the end is about understanding that the whole thing as a habitual conflict is likely to continue. The Joker is going to come back, but we want to embed that the moment of transformation into a sustainable felt sense. There's a different identity, hopefully, that comes out of that experience that includes her as being able to love her enemy. And not just as an idea, but as a whole body, mind, felt experience that will affect her sense of self, her sense of identity in the world from now on. So I was just trying to embody that in order to carry that into the future. So then in that moment, the breathing is just part of surrendering to the embodiment of that felt sense. So that's not provoking or anything. That's not trying to stir anything up, so that in that moment, the breathing has a very different function from other moments. Strictly speaking, attention to the breath wasn't needed. what can we take from that as relating to breath work? What's the general, that or everything that happened there is relevant to working with the breathing pattern as it is, because you're working with, essentially, you're not working with the body-mind intensity of the breath as a felt experience. You're working with the breathing pattern as one aspect of the interpersonal relational configuration, which is more the emphasis in depth therapy, as you said. So then paying attention to the breathing, I did do that partly because of the topic of the weekend. I sort of did when it felt appropriate. Did I really need to do that for the sake of the process? No, I didn't really need to, but I think it did enhance it. And I can't quite remember how that worked, but now with hindsight, it was, I think, a good thing to do, but it wasn't strictly necessary, as you say. But it tells us when we are doing breathwork sessions, it really informs us about how we do not need to push the breathing, but an intensification happens relationally whilst we attend to the breathing pattern as it is. And most of the time, when you attend to the breathing pattern as it is, it will be structured by underlying habitual conflict. And everything we were doing was structured by some shared awareness of the underlying habitual conflict. And that is what you do when you officially are doing breath work, but you're working with the breathing pattern as it is. So to me, that is half of breath work. One half is having some sense of how to work without pushing or changing or regulating anything, but just staying with it is, because that underlying habitual conflict has deep relational significance. And the intensity at that point, the intensification, comes through the awareness of the relational implications of the breathing pattern. So everything most of what happened between Nikki and me would be relevant to that, working with the breathing pattern as it is, because the intensity is not energetically coming from the in-breath or anything like that. It comes from the awareness, the intensifying awareness of what habitual conflict is manifested by the breathing pattern as it is. So that would be, everything that happened would be immediately relevant in my mind to that aspect, half of breath work, working with the breathing pattern as it is. One of the ways that I can relax into that is because I know that if I catch the fragments in the way that Corinna was commenting on, that it will intensify. I don't need to use any body, anything, breathing, anything. I don't need to push anything, up-regulate, down-regulate anything in order for intensification to occur. I'm relaxing into that. I know that if I can just trust my relational engagement and the perceptions that emerge, and if I pay attention to all the fragments that appear in my stream of consciousness, I know that intensification will occur. It will not just be going round in circles. When you and I have a clear established bond and you are sufficiently aware, or let's say sufficiently desperate, one of the two or both, that you are trapped in your habitual body-mind pattern. And if you have some awareness, degrees of it, that constitutes your relational universe. And that the operations of your mind, of your self-awareness, have not fundamentally changed the body-mind pattern, the characterological pattern, the object relations, as you call it, have not changed the body-mind experience of that habitual relational pattern. And when you are aware within that your vitality is compromised, when you have an awareness that the relational compromises manifest in body-mind compromises of vitality, and when you're aware that the compromises of body-mind vitality affect the relational awareness. And so out of that awareness, you have a commitment to saying, yes, I have an awareness of all the relational implications, blah, 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 as much as my ego allows me, but I'm going to use, in a way, artificially, I'm going to use the conscious capacity that I have to direct my breathing as intensity regulator. It's like, initially it's like going to the gym. You're saying, I'm just going to practice intensity. Rather than for the body, you're just doing it for kind of body-mind intensity. And you can use the breath artificially, somewhat artificially, because it's pushing, it's deliberate. We know we can use the breath like that to intensify your body-mind experience of everything that you already have some degree of awareness of, especially that kind of interconnection between the habitual pattern as it manifests relationally, horizontally, and as it manifests vertically in terms of compromised vitality. And when you are on board with that, then the two of us can work together because we have an understanding of why we're doing it. Why are we pushing? Why are we being deliberate about it? Why are we imposing pressure? Why are we intensifying? There is a rhyme and a reason and a rationale for doing it, in recognition of the fact that the pattern otherwise is primitively entrenched in the body-mind as a habit. To the extent that the whole thing is run by an idealization, as we were mentioning earlier about my mate and the changing the world and everything, as you and some others know, what we mean by collaboration and what we mean by relational bond or working alliance is complicated because different relationships actually exist at the same time in the same space. So on some level, when I'm with Nikki, and some of my voice is like a parent, it's like a loving parent. It's like, do this, do that. I'm with you. I'm taking care of you. I'm paying attention to you. It's like a loving parent. So, could you call that collaboration? Yes, you could call it collaboration, but I don't think it's quite what you mean by collaboration. Like by collaboration, you really mean what Petrushka Clarkson means by the working alliance. Is you, Joe, and me having a deal, having a shared understanding, and having a kind of task together. And we're going to do this thing because we know there's a point to it.
Yeah.
This is more like what normally people call adult collaboration, that kind of working alliance bond.
But there's not just that, obviously, with everything else he said. It's also full of ghosts and object relations.
Exactly. But that's it's a strong thing at the foundation of it. Yeah. And yes, I'm agreeing with you that is some kind of condition or requirement. And then, of course, within that, I'm still paying attention, as you say, to the ghosts. And on the level of the ghosts, it's not collaboration, it's a fight. Fighting with that ghost, and me fighting with that ghost, and the ghost fighting with me, and the ghost fighting with her, is like a high noon shootout. There's only going to be one of us left standing. It's not collaboration. It's you or me, mate. And it better ain't me. You're the one who's going to go down. And you want to have that energy also. You're not going to kill me. I'm going to kill you. That is part of therapy. I know many of you don't like it, but unless you have that, you cannot work like that. Get rid of, exterminate, annihilate. Send them back to their maker.
By inviting them to the dinner table.
Yes, exactly. You got it. There's that kind of relationship. And then there is all the object relation, the good object relations, like what, when we think in psychotherapy, relational complexity terms, we talk about the fairy godparent. Breath work, because it touches it resonates with primitive levels of our being, is the idealization when you say, well, in a way it takes us further away. Yes, but on the deeper levels, the idealization is a very human thing. It's a very childlike thing. And it's a very vital impulse. So you want to be able to you want to invite the idealization also to the dinner table, because you want to respond to that childlike longing finally to find the fairy godparent who has the magic wand. And that was very explicit between Nikki and me, that she wanted the magic wand. And we talked about the different, ingredients in the magic wand. So you could see that I wasn't shrinking from that at all. So whatever collaboration we were having, and there was a lot of it, there was also me being the fairy godparent. And, clearly I wasn't shrinking or shirking from stepping into that incredibly delicate, powerful position of saying, I'll tell you a secret. I'll tell you a secret about life. I've got the magic wand. This is a magic wand I've got to give you, which I'm generously handing over to you. So who talks like that? I mean, what human being in their right mind would be that presumptuous? You'd have to be a wizard. It's like a kind of, I don't know. If you're old enough, then you would say that's a Yoda figure. It's there's some kind of creature like that, which everybody wants a piece of. So, but you mustn't shrink from it, because that is part of the collaboration. Unless you can have that parental attitude, where you are really comforting a toddler or an infant, that is part of breathwork. You need to be able to do that, including the fairy godparent, including the good parent, including the comforting parent. Look, when people are traumatized, and in breathwork, let's say they regress more intensely to the child trauma, whatever that was. Let's say they were bullied at school. The kid comes home, and you want to be the parent who knows how to comfort them. You take them in your arms, you hold them, and you process the trauma of what just happened. That's part of your underlying presence and attitude when you invite people into the depth of the breath, because it can have regressive effects. It can take people into altered states of consciousness, and part of altered consciousness is that they more intensely experience the trauma. And then you need to be able to be the comforter, or the I don't know, call it more scientifically, the interactive regulator, who can process the trauma and help them process the trauma. And that's like a good parent. That's what any ordinary kid wants from their parent. Like when I'm upset and traumatized, I want you to be able to comfort me. And that you need to be able to have that as part of breathwork. Otherwise, to me, it's a double message, because everybody knows somewhere in the back of their intuitive mind that breathwork has that potential. It can invite you into a regressive state. And if you're not willing to be the comforting parent who responds to that regressive state, then as a breathworker, I think you're giving a double message. You're saying, go there, but I'm not going to go there with you. So I don't want to do that. That is mystifying. That's messing with people's minds. And so no. If I invite people into regression, then I want to know that I can also be regressed, that I can identify with the regression, and that I can be the parent who takes care of it. Yes, and how did she get ready? This is what I was talking about earlier. How did she get ready? She has watched me like a hawk since yesterday morning, as to whether I would qualify, whether I would be trustworthy in those depths of pain. And that's the reasonable thing to do. There's some suspicious part of us, and that's the right thing to do. I would do the same thing. So there's constant scanning, scrutinizing, testing, because there's so much pain and there's so much suspicion of humans, and quite rightly so. From the child's perspective, it's totally valid. And you want to be, as the therapist, you want to be available to that. You want to say, yes, of course, test me, not just whether I've got a certificate hanging on the wall. No, what does the certificate matter? It depends on the human who has the certificate. And I wish that breath workers were aware of that, that they invite people into the breath based on some understanding how much willingness there is, or desperation there is that drives people towards it as sort of often as the last resort. But then the hope is always combined with the suspicion and the scanning and the, can I trust these people? And then all of that, both the idealization and the hope and the suspicion on the one hand, all of that is completely ignored. And then people think that the breath work can just happen as an activity and an instruction. Yeah, but all of that is activated. There is no human being that possibly can be attracted to breath work without that conflict being engaged. Because you do know somewhere in the back of your mind, if I breathe more intensely, I'm going to feel more, And that's going to, like Kate said yesterday, that's going to let things emerge. So then who's going to take care of that? I'm coming to you because I know I can't take care of that, because left to my own devices, I will keep it at bay. I will keep it stuffed in the cupboard for the rest of my life. So I need some help, that if we're going to do some artificial breathing activity that is likely to provoke it, I want you to be aware of it, and I want you to be there and present to then help me deal with it. That's the implicit hope. And then, of course, in most breath work, that nobody even thinks about these things. I don't think ethics is going to make a blind bit of difference. But also, you know, many of the people who are desperate enough to go to this more objectifying kind of breath work, they are desperate, and they don't mind whether the person has any ethical anything or other. You know, they're desperate enough to want a piece of it. And because the whole thing is surrounded by this idealizing kind of umbra, this kind of, you know, you've tried everything, this is the alternative to therapy, this will transform you in a way that therapy has failed to. If the whole thing sets itself up like that, there's always going to be suckers who are going to go for it. Let me raise this a little bit to the abstract principles that you will need if you are the therapist. Why are we doing breath work? Because we understand that we can use deliberate breathing to intensify experience or to downregulate experience. We can deliberately affect our internal state by controlling the breathing one way or the other. As we've said in various ways, if you are going to change the breathing, if you're going to deliberately affect it, whether you know it or not, whether you mean to or not, whether you like it or not, if you give instructions one way or the other, if you step into the role of the regulator, you assume the role of the regulator, there is no way on earth that you can avoid resonating with the blueprint of the parental regulators that the person is living with. Yeah? You're not the first person who offers themselves or who gets chosen to be the regulator, the interactive regulator. You are the last currently in a long, long line of previous regulators who, as Elina was just saying, you know, have done some kind of job, but also have re-traumatized people. Many times when people expose themselves and they make themselves vulnerable in all kinds of ways, not just breath work, it backfires. And you know, there are many, many people who come out of breath work who feel re-traumatized, and they say so. You know, they have their own language for it, but they say so. And then they can blame people, they can blame the instructors, but also they have to blame themselves because they were desperate enough to push themselves over the edge. We need to approach the whole thing with this kind of sensitivity and appreciation that we are stepping into a pre-existing underlying conflict, and which is already based on previous wounding and previous bad experiences and previous trauma and previous re-traumatization. Okay, so this is, of course, as I say down here at the bottom, this is, of course, what dogmatic breathing instructions fail to take into account, as we've said many times now. Okay, so when we appreciate that there is always a pre-existing characterological or established conflict, habitual conflict, which is somehow constitutes the person's waking consciousness most of the time, we appreciate that there are different kinds of using breath work. And as I said, look at Dan Brulé for the hundreds, I mean, maybe not hundreds, but tens of breathing techniques that will fulfill these varying functions. I concocted a little handout for you. This was what I had done yesterday. When you understand that this is the spectrum, yeah? Can you see my cursor there? This is the spectrum that are the different states that the person can be in. They can be in their habitual mode, which is more or less the window of tolerance. They can be outside of their habitual mode, in which case they feel, oh, this is unfamiliar territory. You know, I don't quite know what's happening. I'm a bit out of control. Different degrees of emergency. And at the far end, the emergency can tip over into re-traumatizing overwhelm. And often it then oscillates into re-traumatizing shutdown. You know, these are the dark red and the dark blue are the re-traumatizing possibilities that always exist at the far end of the internal conflict. So let me show you how that then connects with different kinds of breathing. So this is when you become the regulator, this is what you want to have in the back of your mind. What is the logic? What is the rationale? What is the aim? What are we aiming at when we use different kinds of breathing? So here. It's the same handout that some of the therapists amongst you are familiar with. It's those four, hang on. This is the spectrum. And this is the window of tolerance. I'm not going to go into explaining the window of tolerance. If you're not familiar with it, doesn't matter so much the detail. Most of the time, people think of the window of tolerance as a property, as a function of the client's body-mind. Like what degree of intensity, degree of affect can they tolerate in their window of tolerance? And what are they comfortable with, or what arousal or activation are they uncomfortable with because it's too triggering and they have to shut it down? But actually, it's much more useful to think of the window of tolerance as a function of the therapeutic system. That Nikki and I together, whatever bond we have created, we co-create a window of tolerance of us as a relational system. And certain things in that system, certain intensities can be navigated or invited, and others are just one bridge too far. I think of the window of tolerance as a systemic property. There are different kinds of breathing, as I said, which you can find out from Dan Brille, what the different techniques are that human beings have discovered by integrating Western breathing, Eastern breathing, that correspond or might be helpful in these different states. Yeah? The fundamental thing is about, do I intensify? Do I calm down? What techniques are likely to do that? Keeping in mind what I said earlier, that fundamentally the breathing pattern is actually very individual. And you don't want to be too sure what technique is going to have what effect. It's similar to psychopharmaca. You know, the pharmaceutical industry makes out that they figured out the brain mechanisms of mental disturbance. There's a chemical imbalance, supposedly, which now they have the right dose of the right chemical that will counteract the imbalance. Yeah? That's what they tell you. That's how they sell it. Some of you may have experience with this. When I did my practicum at the mental health place, like years ago, I chose one where, you know, people were a little bit more suspicious of the drugs. They said it's complete trial and error. The same antidepressant has a completely kind of shutting down effect on one person and completely activating effect on another person. There is no human generality about what effect these chemicals have on anybody. So fundamentally, it's trial and error. You suck it and see. The same is true with breathing. You suck it and see. But there are some general principles. Okay. What kind of breathings might we want in those different states? Let's start with the extremes, which are unlikely to happen in this group when you're going to start practicing. It's unlikely that anybody, when they become your client, is going to be in a completely frozen, numbed out state, dissociated state. But if somebody is, then you might want a more vitalizing or charging kind of breathing. Still calm, but you're counteracting their habitual breathing, which is probably very rigid and minimal. And you're sort of encouraging them, which relationally, as we just said, is only possible if you step into some kind of benign parent who is the benign regulator. That is the relational requirement, that you can take that attitude of being the big person who says, it's fine, feel my hand here, breathe here, take a breath, look at me, it's safe, nothing bad is happening right now. You know, like that kind of attitude, which is what a good parent does with a traumatized kid. So you might want vitalizing, you might want more intensely charging breath. In the middle of everything, where the person is in their window of tolerance, you can encourage a deep breathing, which is not particularly meant to be charging or discharging or calming down or intensifying, but it's a kind of balance, but it's a kind of enjoying vitality with. So there can be a kind of breathing where you invite the person to expand into their limitations. So one specific intervention that you might want to use, this is a really important breathwork intervention. When they say, I feel my breathing is restricted, with the kind of attitude of, oh, what's the point? I can't expand anyway. The muscles are too tight. It's such an effort. Oh, it's don't invite me to expand because it's such a bloody effort. I might as well give up. The intervention that counters that, or that stays sane in the face of that resignation, is to say, I invite you to breathe right up against the limitation. Feel where the limitation is. I'm thinking of that image, I don't know, some poem where some tiger in a cage is no longer going around the perimeter, is no longer even looking through the bars, but has resigned himself to sitting in the middle of the cage. It's a bit like that. Many people are like that. I can't bear to even go to the bars because it reminds me I'm in a cage. So I won't bother. Don't ask me to. So it's very important that in that situation, when you feel there is this underlying hopelessness or resignation, that you can say, well, you're desperate, sitting there lonely in the middle of that cage. Life is passing you by. How long do you want to keep sitting there? No, let's, the vitality that is available, you can't break the bars at will, but what you can do is you can go right up to them. You can expand against them. If you feel that your chest is restricted and small, and you're lumbered with a kind of constriction or tension that you haven't chosen, but that you're now kind of trapped by, we can use this breathing session not to create some kind of miraculous fireworks, but you can go right up, you can breathe right up, you can expand right up against the limitation. That is a meaningful invitation. You want to be able to have that, because what they're really fishing for is a magic wand where you say, let's pretend the restrictions are now there and you are liberated now, my magic wand will take you out of the prison. Yeah, that's not on the menu. Like what I said yesterday about many clients deep down, they are in the childlike position where they want the complete kind of transformation from the caterpillar into the butterfly, ideally without feeling anything, whilst being anesthetized. So that's in a way what the person is asking for. Don't invite me to expand, because when I expand, then I will feel my restrictions more intensely, and I don't want to feel that, so I can't be bothered. So in the face of that, that's a pretty important intervention. Well, regardless, I mean, that's where we are. So feel, breathe, expand, and then expand right up against the limitation. This is your life. Like in England, they used to have a television series where they invite some celebrity, and then at some point the host comes in with a big red book and says, this is your life, with all the pictures and the history and everything. So this is your life. What other life, you can fantasize about another life, but this is your life. This is the trap. This is the prison you're living in. So, Joe, you're raising your hand.
Yeah, it's like, to me, wouldn't it seem like if someone's all tight, wouldn't it just be natural to just do that preparation anyway, by just going up to the restriction and feeling it and being until it softens enough to go into the next pushing
Absolutely.
phase?
Yeah, exactly. So I'm saying it in slightly, there are different attitudes one can take to this, and I've said it now. Just remember a little while ago, I was talking about the different attitudes that all need to be present. There is the very compassionate attitude where nothing has to change, but there's also the fight. And when you have somebody who's some people might say manipulatively resigned, because they're wanting you to do the whole work. Like this is often kind of in situations that this happens in breath work, it happens in therapy, where the person comes in, they want some magical transformation, but they're not going to make a bloody effort, and they're waiting for you to wave the magic wand and do all the work. And you are entitled to feel some kind of frustration about that. That this is part of the fight. You're fighting. When I said it's a high noon shootout, you're fighting against their resignation, and there's either going to be your energy, your vitality, your hope, your belief in yourself and them that's going to be left standing, or they're going to wipe you out with their resignation and drag you into the swamp. So you want to be able to have a fight. And part of your fight is to have more that attitude that I was just speaking from. I'm going to be damned if I'm going to give in to your resignation. That's a completely irrational thing. It's understandable. I can have compassion, but actually for the purposes of what we're doing here, it's entirely irrelevant, because now you're going to expand right up to the limitation if I've got anything to do with it. You want to be, yeah.
Well, I'm thinking also it's probably, just as common, if not more, for the person to be like, right, I'm going to fucking.
That's the next thing.
And yes, they want to force through, but actually this is what they need as well before just blasting through.
Absolutely. Completely agree. Yes, because as you've already said it, Joe, let's run with it. Why does the blasting through never work? The blasting through never works really, because it's a fantasy that forgets what we're saying, which is that there is an underlying conflict. And the more one part is trying to blast through, the more the other part gets terrified. And so the more one part insists on expanding or pushing, the other part is more and more contracting, because they are terrified that the pusher is taking them into some unfamiliar, traumatizing state, which by definition, because they're pushing, they're going to be insensitive to. So the internal pusher, by definition, is not a good regulator. It's a pusher, not a regulator. So that when it really gets intense and the pushing has had some kind of intensifying effect, when it then really gets to intensity of experience, at that point, I need a regulator who is sensitive to me. I don't need some blind pusher. So if I have a blind pusher, I'm going to contract and I'm going to be terrified and I'm going to resist all day long. So the more I push, the more I get terrified and resist. And that's why, as you're implying, Joe, this kind of blind pushing never really works. It may lead to fireworks. You can take yourself into an intense state with shaking and kind of, the cramping fingers and the fish fingers and all the rest of it. But the question then is, how does that intensity of experience get integrated into life?
For me, it takes me way back from the intimate edge, basically.
Exactly.
And that's why I've never had, any really great experiences with it. It's just been, I start to feel all the physiological effects, but I'm way back from the intimate edge.
That's right. Exactly. So then if we turn that around and say, if we can have all the sophistication and wizardry of all the breathwork techniques, but at the intimate edge, then there is a synergy of the relational and the body-mind energy process that is much more likely to be a kind of alchemically transformative than just half of that. You really need the pressure cooker and you need the lid in order to generate the pressure that will generate transformation. Absolutely. Okay, let me just finish this spectrum then. So then there is the pushing, hyperventilating. Generally speaking, we're talking about emphasizing the in-breath, emphasizing oxygen, emphasizing fast. This is really the inherent logic of rebirthing breathing, where you leave out the gaps. If you leave out the gaps, you just keep intensifying. And that might then go all the way to cathartic breathing with noises and screaming and all the rest of it. But if it starts becoming re-traumatizing, you also then want to be the regulator who knows how to calm it down. And the calming down, as you found maybe earlier in the exercise, just emphasizing the out-breath typically isn't quite doing it, because the out-breath invites us to drop into the sensation. And if you're in a traumatized state, you don't want to drop into the traumatized sensation. So then some, in a way, rigid structure, like the box breathing, where in-breath, out-breath, almost robotically, you can do that, has a protecting effect, where you don't energize further, but you're also not quite dropping on the out-breath into the sensation. And then there is a down-regulating kind of, maybe you want to have minimal breathing, or, it's very individual again, what actually works for the person. It's obviously you need to have the relational contact in order to be able to down-regulate. They need to trust you enough to let them regulate them down. And what actually does do the down-regulating, because of partly what you said, just Joe, is very individual. So I wouldn't make any kind of too general recommendations as to what technique is actually going to do that. Because you see, in those areas, the person is in their extreme. This is like the worst thing that people, the worst state that they're going to be in terms of re-traumatization. So what actually does it for them is very individual and very delicate. Okay, does that make sense? Let's leave it there. This is the overview. And you want to be available to all of those possibilities using all the various techniques. Does that make any sense? Is that enough? It's obviously like a quick whistle-stop tour. We could talk more about each of those, but it gives you a little flavor, yeah? Like an overview. To somebody with a hammer, everything looks like a nail. That is definitely what I'm suggesting. Because that is being relationally sensitive, and that's actually the meaning of regulation, that you're flexible. You're not doing always the same thing. If your kid is upset, or if they're angry, or if they're depressed, or if they're withdrawn, or if they're, you don't do the same thing. The point of regulating is that you do different things at different times, and that also needs to extend to whatever technique or the purpose of the. If we are going to be regulators, we want to change the state. We want to ultimately, as you and I discussed yesterday, we want to, whatever that means, improve the state. And if the state is hyper and traumatic and overwhelmed, we want to calm it down. And if the state is kind of depressed or comatose or numb, then we want to vitalize it. And if the state is ambivalent, then we want to, like within the habitual conflict, then we want to be able to maybe intensify it to the point that the pressure cooker becomes transformative. Well, that's why I don't quite agree with the group setting. That's why I would do it differently. Like if we met in person here and we did breath work, I would do it differently. I would maybe start the first, 20 minutes, half hour. We can do some rebirthing, holotropic type breathing. But then I would organize it in small groups where every person breathing has somebody to be with them. And then it becomes differentiated. I wouldn't do the same thing for everybody. Because if it's going to be relational, you need to have somebody who's just there paying attention to you. So I would organize the group differently. We can do it in a group, but we need to have the option of splitting it into subgroups that attend to each breather separately. You can start it together. There's quite a lot of you can do at the beginning. But yes, I wouldn't do it like that. And that is quite complicated because the people attending, if you split it into smaller groups, like if we did that, if we were to meet in person, I would pick the people who I know have kind of relational competence more developed. I would say, well, this person is breathing, they're getting into deep water there. So, be there, attend, pay attention, be present. Because when the person goes deeper, then they need somebody present. So then you don't do the same thing for everybody. When breathwork started, like with the rebirthing, I said in the early 80s, I can remember going to festivals and there was the Rainbow Dome and, we were all breathing our heads off. And for me, it was great. Thank you very much. But for some people, it was traumatizing and it wasn't so good. And for some people, it didn't do anything. And so, because it works for let's say 20 to 30% of the people, do you want everybody else to be a casualty? No, I wouldn't want to do that now. I would want to set it up in a way that I can take care of at least 90% of the people. So this is where we left off. We've got the whole spectrum within the client's underlying established habitual conflict. We're not just taking a walk in the park. We are aware that we are involving ourselves or intervening or chucking things into a minefield. So what should I do? You can take that internally as your ego. What can your ego do? Or as the therapist, what should I do as a therapist within the client's pre-existing conflict? So as we said many times now over the weekend, you need to be fully available at any point in time to drop whatever regulation technique you're using, up, down, whatever. You need to be available at any moment in time in the procedure to say, okay, and how is it now? And to work with it as it is. And as I said, and various people have commented, the demonstration with Nikki was much more that. Yeah, for the purposes of the teaching, I introduced a little bit of breathing here and there where it was meaningful, where it was conducive, but I wasn't doing this particularly. I was much more working here. So I was demonstrating that. And when you look at it then in detail, pushing the breathing, regulating the breathing up or down, imposing breathing techniques versus attending to the breathing pattern as it is right now, on the understanding that this pattern always already has layers of conflict structured into it. So when you say, oh, let's pay attention to the breathing as it is, doesn't mean everything is going to be peaceful or harmonious or easy. No, the more you pay attention to the breathing pattern as it is, it has this conflict already structured into it. So it's not going to be necessarily comfortable. It's not going to be going to sleep or, and in whatever you do, as we said yesterday, and this is the therapists, have more context for this, being aware of who you are becoming. What does that mean in the language of yesterday? What ghost you are being mixed up with, whatever you do, whether you are the regulator or whether you're here. The ghosts are hanging around anyway. Huh? The relational turn is just another way of really articulating and providing a foundation for the idea that you cannot make an intervention, whether you're silent, whether you're active, whether you make an intervention, whether you don't know what to do, whatever you do, it's an intervention. And to understand that there's no intervention that anybody possibly can conceive of without becoming somebody. This is the point of the relational turn. This is, this happened for me, I don't know, maybe 30 years ago. It is a bit of a watershed in my life as a therapist. I couldn't go back to a naive conception of techniques after that. There is no technique in and of itself that is helpful or unhelpful or, inspired or deluded or whatever. So there's different ways of formulating it, but in the more generic terms, you can say, it is impossible for a therapist to follow a strategy. Every word of this I've thought about, I've sweated blood, sweat, and tears over every word of this. I'm trying to be very precise. To follow a strategy of overcoming or changing a dysfunctional pattern without enacting in the transference the person, what in psychoanalysis we might call the wounding object, in relation to whom that pattern originated. In terms of me and Nikki, whatever hope, she was scanning me suspiciously in previous workshops and yesterday, and she concluded, all right, there's a human being who I might just take a risk with because maybe he's not going to disappear into his own pain when I let mine flow. Yeah. I became a hopeful, promising human that implicitly she's hoping will counteract or contradict or transform her experience that whenever she gives expression to her pain and allows it to flow, the other person's pain takes over, and then she pays attention to that. And then she gets focused on that, and then she disappears. Her pain can't actually flow because she needs to avoid triggering the other person's pain. Let's just say it like that. So if we want to overcome that, let's just call it simply, I cannot let my pain flow in the presence of somebody else or towards somebody else. This is the negative pattern, yeah? When we're saying of overcoming or changing a dysfunctional pattern. Her suspicion and her mistrust and her constantly reconfirmed experience that any attempt for her to let her pain flow or be expressed towards another results in the other person's pain being triggered, taking over, and then her attention is with that. That is the painful, isolating pattern. And that's what we want to overcome, let's say. Yeah. So how do we do that? If I follow a strategy, as it says here, of overcoming that, that means if I'm strategically intervening, systematically and strategically intervening to overcome that, I will become the joker. I will remind her, I will constellate at the very least the whole line of people, the whole long line of people who made it impossible for her pain to flow. I cannot fight the pattern without enacting it. That's what the relational turn says. I will have to engage with the fact that if we get anywhere near a little bit of pain flowing, the joker will come out. It's systematic. It's not an accident. It's not a mistake. It's not random. It's completely systematic. You can expect that you will get, as the therapist, you will get mixed up with that ghost. I could get a bit more specific because the joker is not exactly the person whose pain gets triggered, but it's in the vicinity. I'm going to be a little bit broad brushstrokes. The key point is you cannot heal a negative pattern, whatever you've defined as a negative pattern that needs to be improved or whatever. You cannot do that. You cannot transform that without having the wounding being experienced and without getting up with the wounding ghost. When you really understand that this is not just occasionally the case, but this is a law of nature, a law of psychological nature. Something fundamentally gets rearranged in everything you've been taught about what therapy is and how it works and how it's supposed to, what you're supposed to. When you really drop into this, the inevitability of this, then something fundamental, tectonic plates shift inside you in how you understand the role of the therapist. So in terms of breathing instructions, that means you, just on the most, in a way, superficial level, you cannot be predominantly give instructions. And as Evangelia said, a lot of the training is giving the same instruction over and over to everybody. That's one of the extreme manifestations of it. You cannot predominantly give instructions, let alone dogmatically repetitive instructions, without getting mixed up with the ghosts of previous instructors, like all the long line of instructors that the person has experienced in their life. Benign, traumatizing, pushy, slave driver, harsh, you're going to be in line with that. You're going to get mixed up with that. Or if you want to keep it really simple, instruction without love is counterproductive. That's why we need the intimate edge. Okay, any questions about that? Any comments? The way I'm formulating the relational turn is a little bit more evolution of that fundamental revolution that Freud introduced, where he changed like that. He thought that the transference is an obstacle, and then he reframed it, and he understood exactly what you're talking about, which is that it seems like a very destructive obstacle to the therapeutic process to have the transference there, to have those ghosts kind of messing things up. However, when you really get to the bottom of the ghost, they take you right to the origin of the pain, right to the origin of the wounding. And so it actually becomes, as he called it, a royal road into the wounding, into the unconscious, rather than an obstacle. So that reframe, that revolutionary reframe, the discipline of psychoanalysis has lived off that, quite happily for 100 years. That's what all psychoanalysts agree upon, because it is such a profound reframe, such a profound insight. Yes, exactly. When you are now going to be practicing, the key thing to pay attention to is the correlation or the simultaneous quality that we've commented on throughout the weekend between the vertical contact and the horizontal contact. So you are paying attention to, when Corinna was talking earlier about all these kind of subtle cues that were going on between Nikki and me. They are body cues, emotional cues, imagination cues, mental cues, thoughts, words. And all of that within Nikki has a particular charge. And it was clear from the beginning already when she entered that there was a lot of conflict about letting the pain flow versus keeping it in or holding it or carrying it herself, and making sure that she wouldn't trigger somebody else's pain. So this is the internal, this is the vertical conflict that's already pre-established. And then how does that, all of that complex universe, internal world of Nikki's, how does that connect with between her and me in the here and now? Yeah? It's when those things come together that we co-create the intimate edge. And as the therapist, you want to use all of that. Yeah? You want to use all of that on the understanding that every movement by Nikki or by me has a meaning in the system in terms of that underlying conflict. That every movement anybody makes, anything anybody says, any gesture anybody makes, has a meaning in that, in the deadlock of that conflict. And it becomes associated with it. So when we use the breath on top of all of that, what are we really going for? We're going for a vibrant awareness of the inner relationship, you know, that Nikki has within herself, i.e., for simplicity's sake, her and the Joker, simultaneously with the vibrant awareness of the outer relationship. When we talk, this becomes important, I'll show one more handout, which is the sort of overview. But when we talk about outer relationship, we're not just talking Nikki and me. Yeah? We're talking about an awareness of the resonance between previous relationships that were like that. So we are talking about awareness of multiple simultaneous levels of parallel process. That I'm not the first person where the conflict about whether to let her pain flow or not is constellated. I'm the last in the long line of those kind of situations where that conflict manifests. So awareness of outer relationship means me in comparison or contrast, or as an instance of that long line. We're operating in the tension between this might happen, if this is the client, this is the therapist, then the client may come to a place where they let the pain flow. In Nikki's example, that would be letting the pain flow. This fountain is like letting the pain flow in the good case. Why doesn't that happen? Because what happens much of the time is this. This is the ghost. There's internal conflict. Should I express, let the pain flow? Should I hold it in? Also in the external relationship. Can I let the pain flow with him there, Michael there? Or should I hold it in? Because the ghost is definitely humiliating her and shaming her for letting the pain flow. So, and drawing it like that means that I'm accepting that I'm getting mixed up with the ghost, that in her unconscious or subliminal experience, I'm getting mixed up with that ghost. Yeah? So this is the kind of awareness that you want to have when you are sitting in the therapeutic position. And what we're interested in is the intensification of this conflict is possible via breathing. You can intensify this or you can calm this down, depending on different ways of breathing. This is going on anyway. Yeah? This is the relational thing. This is what Nikki and I were doing, as people were saying, I could have done the whole session without any breathing whatsoever, because the intensity of that exists anyway. But this one, we can intensify with the breathing. This is the client's body-mind conflict across all the various layers: body, emotion, breath, imagination, mind. And this whole matrix of these body-mind levels is conflicted, and this can be influenced by breathing. If we breathe in a particular way, or if this individual breathes in particular ways, then the awareness of that conflict can be intensified. That's what we're doing. You want to be available as the therapist to control, regulate, push the breathing, supposedly to ultimately improve it or to transform it. But this doesn't just happen by breathing alone. It happens also in a relationship where you can work and stay with and accept the breathing pattern as it is. As we said yesterday, the breathing pattern has the whole life story in it, yeah? Which means that the wounding dynamic, the pain that Nikki carries, is manifest in how she breathes, how the pain flows via the breathing pattern versus how she holds herself and stops the pain flowing. And there are aspects of the breathing pattern that are correlated to those two impulses, to the conflict of those two impulses. This is the horizontal. Yeah? This is how you engage with the breathing pattern horizontally. You accept it as it is, you don't push anything. Here on this side, you become into the regulator position and you are either up-regulating or down-regulating the breathing. So why are we trying to do this? As I said, whichever one you do, you can, as the therapist, you can relax into knowing that if you catch all the fragments, this will intensify. This way it will intensify, this way it will intensify. It will intensify either way. And so that means whatever you do, the session will be significant. Given half a chance, with you being awake to both of those streams, left and right, it will be significant. What I'm trying to show you now is that there are different kinds of transformation that occur. The focus can be in different departments of that whole universe, whether it's on the side of the emergency or whether it's vertical or whether it's horizontal. Different transformations can occur. A relational transformation can occur. There's a chronic external conflict in relating to the world. Yeah, Nikki constantly feels like, I cannot let my pain flow because people are going to get triggered. Why would we want to transform that? So she can recover vibrancy and vitality or immediacy in contact with others, like her and I did, yeah? And that includes the ghost, that includes the joker. If you do regulate and either regulate the breathing up or down, then you are going for vertical transformation of chronic internal body-mind conflict, which means that her vitality is stuck in a conflicting pattern where it can't flow, but it can't stop flowing either. Yeah? There's constantly pain that's pressing, like a kind of volcano wanting to come out, but there's constantly some kind of lid on it. And when you are pushing the breathing, you are intensifying that body-mind conflict somewhat artificially. So why would we do that? In order to recover a kind of undefended vulnerability, vibrancy. It's basically like saying, let the pain flow. And I said, look, there's this little secret, let the pain flow. That is speaking to the possibility of transforming that chronic conflict into something that flows, which means that some people might say, this is when vertically she might regain contact with herself. And then ultimately we're going for both. So in detail, what does that involve? Intensification, I'll give you that handout later. I'm not going to go into the detail. Intensification happens both ways. What I want to give you now in preparation for the session, that is both for the observers as well as for the therapist, there are some specific questions you can ask that are not abstract. They are much more focused and much more, in a way, closer to experience. In this domain, you ask, in relation to what ghost is your body-mind breathing compromised? We know that it's compromised because that's what we're paying attention to. It doesn't feel easy to expand the breathing or follow the instructions. It's difficult. So then we pay attention to how it is, knowing that it's already conflicted. When it's conflicted, you can ask that question as in the therapist's mind. You don't necessarily ask the client, because that would just be a mental question. we're asking that question in the therapist's mind because we want to focus, we want to orient, we want to be alert to the experiential manifestation of that we hopefully will discover. Yeah? We will discover what that ghost does. When we understand the Joker is present, there are two ways that this can transform. Either, finally, I will get an intricate, detailed, vital experience of how the Joker interferes in my relationship. If I'm Nikki, then there's a lot of charge in the experiential recognition, not the mental. Mentally, she knows that already. No, in the here and now, felt experience of, yes, here, right now, my relationship with Michael is really influenced by the presence of the Joker. And that can be a transformative experience. I didn't bargain for the fact that the Joker themselves might transform. That's the kind of bonus that happened later. But even just the recognition of how the Joker is present, that's a transformation of some kind of unconsciousness about it. What the other way that might transform is that I'm realizing Michael is not the Joker. Michael, I've tested him already. I've checked, I've scanned him already, but I'm having an experience of intimacy that is very rare, that I don't usually get with people because the Joker always interferes. But right now, because we've recognized the Joker, he's not actually particularly getting in the way. And I'm getting a connection, a sort of uninterfered connection with Michael, that in that external horizontal relationship that I don't usually get. So that's a transformation. That's a transformative experience. So that's on the side of if you work with the breathing pattern as it is. You see, when I say this whole thing intensifies until it becomes significant, it'll become significant whatever happens. If you follow that intensification and those questions, and you come to some kind of felt experience of it, that will be significant. That'll be maybe not the whole point of the session, but it will be a sufficient point. You will feel, okay, that was significant. And either way, these are the two possibilities on down that intensifying avenue. That'll be significant, whether this happens or both. When you go down the avenue of pushing, which Joe has been talking about, when breathwork instructors have done that before, how it turns him off, how he just can't connect, how something in him contracts against it. Well, maybe, I don't know, you tell me, Joyce, whether it's too strong to say, how he feels traumatized by their dogmatic insensitivity. And he just can't.
I feel a defensive anger against it as well. It's like, it feels like I'm being forced. There's no sensitivity. There's no kind of, like relational, intimate edge.
Yes, exactly.
Myself or them.
Yeah. But when we do that, when somehow there is enough, let's say in Joe's terms, collaboration, then there are two kinds of transformation also that can happen in this domain. In the vertical transformation, you're regulating, you're inviting the client's surrender to the body-mind intensity, either of the wounding or the experience of healing the wounding. Either is transformational. When the person really feels the pain, the emergency, the intensity of the pain, why is that transformative? Because most of our lives we spend habitually, without even meaning to, defended against it. And we don't actually get to feel the full body-mind intensity of the wounding that we are avoiding, because we're so good at avoiding it, understandably. If through the pushing of the breathing, you can get to feel your internal conflict, the intensity of the internal conflict, and how much avoidance there is, and how much pain there is, and how much intensity of emergency there is, and how much blocking of that high tide there is. When you can really feel it in your body-mind, just as a body-mind process, or the intensity of the body-mind process, where you're not shielded, defended against the intensity of the wounding that you experienced, usually as a child, that is transformative, because you can now somehow surrender to the intensity of that in a way that you haven't. That takes you into a different universe. That is transformative. The other possibility is that usually because you have had that, what can also happen is that miraculously you somehow feel some kind of body-mind experience of expansiveness, of joy, of acceptance, of love that wasn't previously available in the defended state. And sometimes people have done so much work before they come to a breathwork session, they breathe and they enter that transcended state. And remember that a lot of the time, people are defended against their pain, but they're also defended against love. They're also defended against healing. They're also defended against surrender to the good. And that can also be transformative. And breath work, by all accounts, when people talk about it, sometimes people get catapulted into that. Usually people think, oh, it's the breath work what did it. I don't think it's the breath work by itself what did it. No, there's previous work that has been incrementally accumulating. There is a particular relational container. And even in the most objectifying kind of instructive, directive breath work in scenario, there is still an internal instructor. Yeah, like whatever external instructor I have who just blindly kind of rams things down my throat, it gets translated. The only way that it applies to my body is because the external instructor talks to an internal instructor. And the internal instructor has been developing over time a kind of relational, compassionate attitude that when I now apply the instruction to myself, it has that kind of transformative relational context. When sometimes breath work works magically, apparently magically for some people some of the time, I think it's on the basis of previous experience. They have visited the pain quite a lot, but also they have developed an internal instructor that provides the sensitivity that Joe says, was lacking in the external one. So there is still a relational context for the transformation, except that it's not obviously external. But of course, it's much more likely to happen, and which is why I was when I was talking about the length of a session and whether you need 3 hours or not. No, if you step into, as a therapist, if you are a breath worker, you step into that position from the beginning, where you're available to all of those 4 possibilities, it's much more likely to happen in an hour. A lot of the time in traditional breath work, it happens inadvertently. Nobody pays attention to it. It maybe happens. It's haphazard. It sometimes does, sometimes doesn't. Whereas what we're trying to do is we're trying to bring relational awareness, internal relational awareness and external relational awareness from the beginning throughout all the time. And then it's much more likely to happen. Okay, that's it.